Ava, Chesed, is gentle. And Gevura, even though Gevura is Pnimius HaChesed, but Gevura is with more intensity. So the Mashal, the Dugma, when two people embrace, they're taka holding each other closely. But when two people are fighting and they hold each other, it takes more people to separate them than if they're embracing. So, as two people are misabkim yachad, was reingeln sich, that are in a fight, they hold each other with much more intensity. So, b'derech klal, when we give people praises, we do it in a gentle way. And when we give people criticism, we do it in a very intense way. So the critical message they hear in a stronger way. So I look for stories, Hasidic stories, and in Yonim and Sforim, where we find that someone was matzliach to give over an inyan of chesed with the intensity of gevura. So I'm going to share that kind of story with you tonight. So Geven Ayid, his last name was Raskin. He had two sons. Reb Michal had more than two sons, but two of the sons ran stores in Crown Heights. Sollen sein gesund. Reb Michal Raskin and Berke Raskin. And their father was a Greiser Chassidische Yid. And when they were children in communist Russia, the father sent them to Shkola. He sent them to public school. At that time, the risk of keeping kids at home was too great. They went to school, and that was it. Shabbos and weekdays, they went every day. Anyway, one Shabbos, it was snowing a little bit. I heard the story from Michal Raskin. So the boy told us the story. And he said one Shabbos it was snowing a little bit. And a teretz, an excuse to stay home they had. But they liked going to school. What are they going to do at home? So in the morning, they went. Shabbos, whatever, they went. They were young children. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or whenever the time was, 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, they came home. They walked into the house. Their father was standing and davening with his face to the wall. At Gedavened, he was a few hours in, davening ba'avodah. And the kids came in and there was a commotion. He turned around. And he realized at that moment that his children chose to go to Shkola. And he walked over to them, and his eyes, he was pouring tears, and he hugged them with all his might. And Michal said that he thought for sure that he's going to get a farask. He thought for sure his father's going to hit him, and he would have deserved it. And he says that hug is why he's a frum yid. So that's for me such a story where the chesed and the ava of chinuch carries the intensity of gevura. So Al Kopanim, tonight the first thing is, I'm sorry for interjecting with a story. I want to begin by asking Rabbi Leshes, the Mora de Asra, and the Rav of all his Siyatzus in the Inyane Chinuch to begin the Farbrengen.
Mijn broerlijke huwelijk naar de Jonning, zo neem maar niet weten wat het zal komen. It's a very nice place to have a very nice, some good visitors here for the Farbrengen. And obviously always surprises are very welcome, right? Except for the Modas that I found 20 minutes ago. But it's very, very good. And Baruch Hashem, the position right in here, in the school, in all the Inyanim. and it's mamish so appropriate because we know that Friedrich Rebbe's Mesiras Nefesh was bigger for kleine Kinderach. Because in Tzad Chukei Medina, somebody which is older was not a problem to sit in Torah. But make the underground Chadorim, Yeshivas, das ist even Mesiras Nefesh from Friedrich Rebbe. Unser Rebbe in our generation, the Rebbe spoke a lot of times about all the singing on Yud Beis Tammuz, and the Rebbe gesagt at the Gimmel that by the time the Friedrich Rebbe got in Mesiras Nefesh, nobody could see where it's going to lead us. This is what the results are going to be. The Rebbe was in Derech HaTeva, when the children are very young, you can still control them, to tell them, go to Cheder, and say, it's a kone, you'll do it. Okay, how long you can go on with that? Till then, the age of Bar Mitzvah. Come Bar Mitzvah, normally the children come and say, no, I don't want to go anymore. Now I want to go to school, to Shkola. Now I want to go to gymnasium. I remember when the Rebbe to Zamont, Farbrengen, the word, gymnasium. Right? Und der Rebbe gesagt, am Tag, they went to gymnasium. And by this time, we heard the fight out altogether. Maybe it was a simple question, what you are going to achieve, but looking with children when they are so young in the time that they don't look through it, you are going to lose them, and lose them for a lifetime. And the way that we are looking after them is with Mesiras Nefesh, because the KGB will find that the guy who loses his cop right away. It will be Almone, will be a swimming. Der Rebbe hat weiter gesagt, dass der Friedrich Rebbe hat begrenzt, und gat Mesiras Nefesh, weil was mit der Ton darf mit Ton. The results we'll see. Und der Rebbe sagt weiter, alle Besten, that later on, the results from all this little Kinderach, which later on, den Heftidigkeit, and so on and so far, but because of this Chadorim, all they came back, all their children came back, but people later on, years and years later on, they were able to see the results. Mendel das given a Moleke Zeit, the Yud Beis Tammuz, we know that when the Rebbe took the Messias in our generation, our Rebbe in our generation, in the famous Farbrengen, Kabbalah and Messias, the Rebbe finalized, concludes this, from the Cheder, and gesagt, the aim shall help Shenire Pritoi Ba'am Oleinu. That we'll be able to see good fruit in our toil, in our labor. Is the Moleke Zeiten, sometimes you have to wait a generation and a half, maybe 2 generations to see the results. But today we are living in such a Kabbalahist generation, that a lot of times things are going much quicker, and in no time at all you are able to see the good results. The Rebbe shall take help from us, soll sein Biker, these guys from Mashiach Tzidkeinu, and all of us together with the Kinderach, with the Gereit, and the Mishpoches, to be able to welcome Mashiach together. Chaim.
Amen. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Chaim.
Rabbi Gluckowsky is not new to the Kehillah here, Baruch Hashem. And first and foremost, he's a shliach of the Rebbe in the city, Rehovot, and he's Eisig B'chlal and Rabbonos, but he also has moistus, his own moistus as a shliach of a boys' school and a girls' school, a mesifte, a high school, Kenai Mahara, Ala moistus, Chinuch. And you know, in Eretz Yisrael, there's also a network, Reshes, all the Yosef Yitzchok, the moistus of Talmudei Cheder around Eretz Yisrael, which is also a member of the Vaad of the Reshes. And Bechlal, in a Kehillah, so the Inyan of Chinuch is, first and foremost is a prominent Inyan. So it's a covenant for the Kehillah that Rabbi Gluckowsky is here to Farbrengen today in honor of Yud Beis Tammuz. And like Rabbi Leshes mentioned, that the Rebbe spoke about the dogesh of the three of the Rebbe. It's an incredible Sikha. I'm sure there are those here that remember when the Rebbe spoke about the Sikha, where the Rebbe took apart the phrase Vasis, Loyes, Baret, Dira, B'tachtoinim, and the Rebbe explained that B'tachtoinim we see what are the lowest things. The Frierdiker Rebbe's primary area was Talmud Torah, to teach children Aleph Beis, Mikvois, where the Rebbe discusses that you don't have to have Kavanah. Even a person falls into a mikveh and they become Tahir. And the same thing with Shchita, the Frierdiker Rebbe was Mishtadel. So Pashit, to bring down the Inyan of Har Sinai is to bring the Gilui of Elikus, L'matam Me'asorat Tvachim, and that's the whole Inyan of Gilui HaMashiach. So this is our schus for us to be here for this Farbrengen, and Eibishter should hope that with all of us that have a bakosha from the Eibishter, that the Dvarim Hayotzim and Alev should be nichnas into our hearts, into our own chinuch and our own hadracha, and to our sviva. L'chaim, l'chaim.
L'chaim, l'chaim. Rabbi Leshitz mentioned about the Iker, the main emphasis that the Frierdiker Rebbe put on Chinuch, on the little children. And Rabbi Kaplan told the story over about the Raskins. I'll share it, comes Yud Beis Tammuz. For my mishpocha, my family, we have a personal connection with Yud Beis Tammuz in two ways. My wife is from the Mishalom family. She got out of Russia in 1969. They were Oisik all the years when they were in Russia. They were from the underground. The book Samarkand, we call it in our family, it's a family album. Because a lot of the players in the Samarkand book are members of the Mishpocha. Zaydas, uncles, my wife's pictures in there as a 3-year-old. And we mentioned about the school having to go on Shabbos. My wife, Baruch Hashem, together with her brothers, they were mamish yitzil to mishpochas. There were a very small amount of children, families, that never saw a Russian school. And they were one of them. And my wife's parents, they bribed the principal of one of the public schools in the area that her name was written down on the school list, but she never went to school, so she shouldn't have to learn anything that has to do with Kfirah, and also Shabbos. So how did they hide it from everybody? She used to every day put on a school uniform, and when all the kids are walking to school, she would also walk to school. But instead of walking to school, she would walk to the other end of town, and she would either go to her Berke Chain's house, who taught her how to read, taught her Chumash, taught her kids Shulchan Aruch, or she would go to one of her uncle's aunts, and she would stay there during the day, and then when it was time to come home, when school finishes, she would come home also wearing her school uniform, so everyone should see, all the neighbors, everything. She goes to school and she comes home from school. And that's how she was able to go through all the years without having to go to school. She had a private tutor. Her first sitter, Berke gave it to her. And that's how they grew up, underground. The yeshiva, one of the yeshivas that they had in Samarkand, they changed places every couple of months. So there was they lived in a house that was surrounded by walls, a big chotzer, a tremendous courtyard, tremendous chotzer, and over 100 fruit trees in the chotzer. And over there they had an underground mikveh, had an underground yeshiva, and she was in the house. So she was together with her mother, with the grandmother. They were the ones that cooked for the bocher the meals. And so whenever I meet the fellows that learned in that underground yeshiva, so they have a special chavivus, especially when they see my wife, because she was the little kleine, what's it, gedate, she was the small one. And that's what went on. So Mendel, when you talk about, when you learn the sikhs, ever talks about the fruits of the work of the Friedrich Rebbe, and this paytis and paytis of Talmidim from the Mesiras Nefesh of the Friedrich Rebbe. So in our house, it's right in front of my face all the time. I remember when I went on Shlichus to Eretz Yisrael. So the Rebbe, when he sent us on Shlichus, he sent 3 groups from 1976, 77, 78. I was from the 78ers. And it was the only Shlichus that they ever sent. Half the guys were married and half the guys were single. Bocher. It was the only Shlichus that they ever sent Bocher for good. Not to be machazik in yeshiva for a year or two, but to go out for good. Set your lives up. He ever said that it's not enough to support Eretz Yisrael, the Gashmis financially, but he wants to also send representatives who will help build Eretz Yisrael, the Gashmis and the Ruchnis. So I was one of the guys that was a bocher. We had to get married in Eretz Yisrael. And in those days, it wasn't the cell phone era. There wasn't even landlines. It was pretty primitive, which I tell you. I mean, when I had to go out and meet my wife, so in order to give back to relay to my parents what's going on, I would have to go to the central bus station in Yerushalayim, and there was like a row of public phones, and I would call 1-8, and we'd get an operator to get a line to go out of the country, international line, and they would call you back about a half hour later. And I would stand and wait and give them all the numbers on the public phones in the central bus station. And then one of them would ring, and I would go over and pick it up. And I would have 3 minutes to tell my parents what's going on. It could cost about $20 for 3 minutes. And that's how, with all the buses honking in the back and people screaming at you, this is a public phone. What are you taking up the phones for? This is, so I remember when I was offered the shidduch, I had 2 shidduchim, 2 offers. I had an American shidduch and a Russian, Israeli, Russian. So I told my parents, write into the Rebbe and ask the Rebbe which one we should take. Which one should I go out first? So they wrote it to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wrote back, "Kefiret soin bincha," what your son wants. He threw the ball back at me. So my parents tell me, the Rebbe says, "What do you want?" So I told my parents, I said to my parents like this, I said to them, "Listen, Mesiras Nefesh from America, I have in my genes. But Mesiras Nefesh from Russia, I don't have in my genes. We'll try the Hatzor from Russia. It'll be beneficial for the family to mix the Mesiras Nefesh of the Russian genes with the American." It was the time of the taunt, if you remember those days. So, Baruch Hashem. So the first thing is that Yud Beis Tammuz, the Mesiras Nefesh, it's built in by Chassidim. It's not a story that happened way back. We're talking about our generation. We're talking about people that grew up, that were infused with that Mesiras Nefesh, and they kept Yiddishkeit going underground. And the stories that happened and the tremendous Mesiras Nefesh that went on. I have a shvoger, one of my brother-in-laws, his name is Yosef Yitzchak. He's named after the Frierdiker Rebbe. Do you think they were able to give the name just like that? They had a bris. Of course, the bris was an underground bris. But there was a certain amount of people that knew that they had a child, and there was a bris that people were invited to. And there were certain people that came to the bris that the family suspected that they might be possibly those that are giving over information to what's going on. You had to be careful even in the inner circle. Whatever information was provided was only very, very mitzumtzum, and you had to be careful. They didn't know. They had certain suspicions about certain people, even in amongst the most inner circle, to be careful. So they were afraid to give the name Yosef Yitzchak on the name of the Frierdiker Rebbe was already a statement. So they thought about what to do in order to cushion the statement that they're giving the name Yosef Yitzchak. So they made up before the bris that the two Zaydas, when it says V'yikore Shmoi B'Yisrael, one Zayda said Yitzchak, my tate, my father. The other Zayda said, "Was heißt? Ich hab doch a brother. I have a son that was gehaar geworden in Muhammad, died in the war, Yosef." And they started to argue by the bris. Tzimet geben dem Namen Yitzchak to Yosef. They gave the name Yosef and Yitzchak. And then the Bubba said to them both when they were arguing or fighting, asked when help the cause, and they're fighting. So the Bubba said, "As a chaim, sagt er sich sakone, am schlock sich auf a Namen von a kind. It's dangerous for the child. This can't go on like this." So she suggested, she said, "You know what? Don't like a machloikis. If you have baby name, you have Tzai Yosef and Tzai Yitzchak, both names." Then he gave the name Yosef Yitzchak. They finished the bris. So the individual that was by the bris, that they were suspecting him, that he is a merader, a spy for the KGB. He came over to them after the whole thing and he says, "Was meinst du?" He tells him, "Ich verstehe nicht, die ganze Hatzaga, the ganze Spiel, ich bin von mir. He said, you don't think I don't understand that the whole thing was because of me?" This is what he says. And they made like, he said, just imagine to give a name, Yosef Yitzchak, what it meant, and how they had to be careful, and how careful they were at the time also. This is what was going on. We're not talking about 250 years ago. We're talking about 50, 60 years ago. This is the reality of life. This was part of the Mesiras Nefesh that started from the Frierdiker Rebbe's Nesias, from Yud Beis Tammuz, and it went on, battling and fighting. How many people were there? And they kept strong in their Yiddishkeit. And then I'll tell you, when they came to Eretz Yisrael, so you know, some of the friends of my wife, she was a girl growing up in Eretz Yisrael afterwards. She came to Eretz Yisrael. You know, sometimes her friends would go to, like, you know, a parva movie. You know, in Tebi, it's a parva movie. They call it kosher movies. Kavayoch. And I remember she telling me that my shver, my father-in-law, told he wasn't well. He came on, he had a heart condition. He was lying in bed. And my wife tells me she came to her father, she said she wants to go with her friends, they're going. And my father-in-law said, the Mesiras Nefesh that we had in Russia, it wasn't for us to get out of Russia and to start going to movies in Eretz Yisrael. Nicht das gewinnt the Mesiras Nefesh. The Mesiras Nefesh carries on. It takes on just a different type of a levush, and how we have to stay strong in our Yiddishkeit and not get mispulled and not be affected by our environment and our surroundings, but to stay strong just like we stayed strong when we were in Russia. And she realized it also, you know, to make that switch, to shift the gears, to shift the shift, to change gears, and to recognize that it's the same thing, it just takes on a different type of lavush. This is something that we have to recognize till today as we stand. Yud Beis Tammuz, just like the Frierdiker Rebbe taught us not to be nispool then. Azoy nicht anders. Azoy darf sein heit. That's the way it has to be today also. That's the Russian genes. Now the American genes, for our family, my personal family, is my father, well, Shuls, he didn't come from a Lubavitcher family. My father came, my Zaydi was a Chinuch chassid. And my father, as he grew up, from one hand he was a Chinuch chassid, from the other hand, my Bobbe was a Parnas Mishmach. This is Ropshitz, Tzalmis. And my father grew up as a child. He was born here in Elizabeth, New Jersey, not far from me. And there wasn't chinuch at the time. My Zayde started together with Rabbi Teitz's father-in-law, the day school in Elizabeth, but there wasn't chinuch for my father. So my father lived by the Chernobyl Rebbe in Borough Park. He was a Ben Bayis. He grew up in their house for a good couple of years. The Becher that we have for Shabbos, for Kiddush, and also for my father, when he had his bar mitzvah, it was a matona from the Chernobyl Rebbe, and then when he had his chasna. So I have the Becher from the bar mitzvah that I use for Shabbos, and my brother has from the Talmud Koises, the Becher. And so my father grew up, and his family moved to Borough Park, and he learned in Cheder Semis Kamenitz, Cheder Vadas, and he became very. You want to take my pekel, where you want to take it. That's not a chassid. And he took away the pekel. And he gave it to a goyish soldier that he should take it, but not him. Now, when you think about it for a second, finish. Think about it for a second. Basically, the Frierdiker Rebbe was Farbrengen with lulav. B'shas mais, he's getting ready to be arrested. Und verbringt mit dem. Was ist der Chosset? He's telling you what's a Chosset. A Chosset schleppt den Päcklich für Rebbe, wo der Rebbe will gehen. Nicht wo will schleppen den Rebbe. A Chosset is somebody who wants to, he takes the Päcklich for the Rebbe where the Rebbe wants to go, but not where he wants to schlep the Rebbe. And because, you think about it for a second, there was a lot of things that happened from in the arrest and the whole time when the Friedrich Rebbe was in jail. The fact that the Friedrich Rebbe, when he writes down the things that happened, this is what he writes down. It's for us to be able to learn from it. See, he's telling Lulav, and incidentally, I want to tell you that I had a nephew that at a certain point he was a shliach in next to Harvard for a year. Now in Toronto, he was then there, and he told me over a Ma'aseh that the shliach next to Harvard was once Friday night. There was a couple that walked in, two students, a boy and a girl, and the boy tells the shliach, because of my grandfather, you guys in Lubavitch have another holiday. So he says, yeah, what's your name? He says, my name is Lulav. So I want you to know, Lulav came Friday night to a Chabad house to have a meal. Doesn't have us in Yitzchak, like they say. But anyways, so the Rebbe is Farbrengen with Lulav, and he tells him a chassid is somebody that schleps the peck for the Rebbe where the Rebbe wants to go. I remember that when I was when I came to Eretz Yisrael after I got married, I was living in Chabad, learning in the Koil there, and then it came up the position in Rehovot. And that's a story for itself, but I'm not going to go into it right now. I got the position in Rehovot. I was getting ready to move from Chabad to Rehovot. So I turned to one of my mentors, the Mzusha Partizan, the chassid that lived in Chabad. And I asked him if he can give me a couple of words of guidance and direction for the next phase of my shlichus. And he told me, Mendel, the first thing I want to tell you, Zol Sechit Nish, be careful. Zol Sechit be a kapora noch the Shechit. You shouldn't be like a kapora after you get shed. We talked many times in riddles. Kapora noch the Shechit. What do you mean? What is that supposed to mean? So he tells me, du bist gegangen bei kapora. Du bist gesehen, wie Shechten. Yeah. You saw? I said, yeah. He said, what happens to the chicken, he says to me, after it gets shed? I said, then what happens? There's blood. And you cover it up with kisui damba offer. You turn him over in some kind of like, so he says to me, what else? What else? I told him, springt. Oh, he tells me, oh, please, describe to me. I said, oh, they jump, they still have nerves. So I said to him, sometimes you have such a starke, a feste, a strong chicken, that not only does he give jumping a little, but he can springen, and he can even run a little until he plops. He tells me, oh, das it. That's what I'm talking about. I said to him, what do you mean? He says to me, he's got still energy in his body, but what's his problem? His problem is, he says, that he's not connected to his head. He's running all over the place without any real direction. The energy is there, but it's not in the right place because he's not connected to his head. He's a narcissist. And they does that. This is what I'm talking about. He says, you're going out on shlichus. You're full of energy. Keep connected to your head. Because if you keep connected to your head, you'll be heading in the right direction. But if you're not connected to your head, your energy can be spent in all different kinds of ways, but not where the head wants you to go. Not only that, you can be schlepping the head to where the head doesn't want to go. So you got to keep connected to your head. We just, Gimmel Tammuz, we learned the Maimer V'ata Tetzaveh. And over there it says at the beginning of the Maimer that Moshe Rabbeinu is the cup, is the head, and we're the feet. And the feet take the head where the head wants to go to and can't get there by himself. So in order for us to be able to be gesunte Fies, to be healthy feet, we have to be connected to our head, to take our head where he wants to go to and not to schlep him to other places. And that's what the Frierdiker Rebbe told Lulav. Du willst sein a Chassid? Your Cheder was a Chassid. He was schlepping the Peklach where my Cheder wanted to go, where the Rebbe wanted to go. That's a Chassid. Stop to schlep my Peklach where you want to schlep me. Das nicht. There was a Chassid, there was a Shliach in the 50s. He went out and he writes into the Rebbe that he feels for the Hatzloch of his Shlichus. He wants to go to university and take some courses in psychology. It'll help him to be able to understand people. And he asked for the Rebbe a bracha to be able to do it. The Rebbe didn't agree with him. So he wrote it a second time. And he explained more by Riches why he feels it's important for him to go. For the different things he wants to study to be able to help him in his Shlichus. And the Rebbe again told him no. He wrote it a third time. The third time, the Rebbe writes back to him, he says, you're my Shliach. He says, and Shlich Shalom Kamoisim. So why do you want to schlep me to places where I don't want to go to? That's what he writes. Why do you want to schlep me to places I don't want to be? The Mendel. For us to be able to be Chassidim, we have to keep connected to our head. We got to keep learning. The Rebbe's Torah, his Sichos, his Maimorim, his letters, Igers, his Yeshivas. We have to keep our heads in the right place by keeping on learning. And not only that, to carry out his directives, what he asked us to do. That's how we're healthy feet to get the head where he wants to go to. In Mendel, that's the case. I want to give you an example. The Rebbe talks about when we went out on Shlichus, the Rebbe Farbreng, the special Farbrengen, put him cut in Tov Shalom Ches. We went on Shlichus on Shushin Purim Cut in Tov Shalom Ches. So it was a special Farbrengen on Purim Cut. It was in the afternoon, after Mincha. And there was two reasons the Rebbe said he's Farbrengen. It was a Tzeichem L'Shalom for the Shluchim that are going. And also he said it's the beginning of the Yovel Hasheni of the 50th Jubilee, at the 51st year, from when the Frierdiker Rebbe said the Maimer B'Kibbul HaYudim Tofresh Pei Zayin in Moscow, on Purim Kol, which was a Maimer that the Frierdiker Rebbe said in the Lubavitcher Shuler with Russian agents at the shul, and he spoke about the Mesiras Nefesh, the one has to have for Chinuch, and he spoke explicitly about the fact that that by having Mesiras Nefesh to give the right Chinuch to your children, and not to send your children to the places of the Evsektia, of the communist Russia, that alone will destroy all of our enemies that are trying to fight against Yiddishkeit. And he spoke about this publicly, Tofresh Pei Zayin, with hundreds of people by the shul, with Russian agents at the time at the shul, which was the reason that was like the straw that broke the camel's back, that brought to the arrest of the free care. That might to declare outright war in such a way, in such a public fashion, that was it. They had it. They knew he was running the underground the whole time, and they were after him. But to do such an act of Mesiras Nefesh in such a public way, that was it. So the Rebbe said he's Farbrengen for the beginning of the next 50 years from Tofresh, because Tofresh Lamed Zayin was not a leap year, so there wasn't the Purim Cut. But Tofresh Lamed Ches was the first. There was a leap year, Purim Cut. So he says Farbrengen for these two reasons. And the Rebbe said a mimer, the Gimmel Yehudim Tofresh Lamed Ches. And the Rebbe edited the mimer. It's a Mugadik mimer, Tofresh Lamed Ches. And in the mimer, the Rebbe talks about the Mesiras Nefesh, the concept, what the Frierdiker Rebbe talked about the Mesiras Nefesh for Chinuch. In those days, I just was describing to you what went on with my wife. So you can understand what was going on. And those were the days where Mamish, 1927, that's like, the heat of it all. The Stalin era. As the Frierdiker Rebbe describes it in his Yeshiva Samaisa, he describes it as you read the book. There's a book that prints in prison, there's a book of heroic struggle. You have it today all in English. So there's no reason, no excuses. So the Rebbe says in the Maimer that from that we learn that it's not only you have to have Mesiras Nefesh for chinuch in general, for the chinuch of children, that they should go to the right schools, and even though you endanger your lives, you also have to have Mesiras Nefesh for your own personal chinuch. Chinuch atzmi, the Rebbe talks. You have to have Mesiras Nefesh for your own personal chinuch. He talks about chinuch of a fotzes hayadus in the Maimer. He mentions that the Frierdiker Rebbe said that a person's age is not by the passport. You can have people with gray hair that are still playing under the table as little children when it comes to the Yiddishkeit. And you have to be mechanech them, which is a lot of the work that goes on today in the Chabad houses, etc. But he also talks about in the Maimer, the Mesiras Nefesh, that one has to have for his own personal chinuch. Chinuch atzmi. And this is one of the things, if we want to be healthy feet, to be connected to our head, in order to be able to know how to learn what to take out of Yud Beis Tammuz, we have such a treasure chest of sichos and maimorim that the Rebbe explains Yud Beis Tammuz, analyzes Yud Beis Tammuz from all aspects, and gives us so many different ways how we can learn from Yud Beis Tammuz what to do in our own personal lives. And this particular mimer, the Rebbe says about having Mesiras Nefesh for our own personal chinuch. He connects it to the Mesiras Nefesh that the Frierdiker Rebbe talked about in Tofresh Pei Zayin, and he puts it on our own personal chinuch also. I remember at the time when we were Farbrengen zwischen sich the Shluchim, because it's a mimer that the Rebbe said when we make Tzemach on the Shuls. So it means a lot to us, that mimer. It was a mimer prayer. To compare the Mesiras Nefesh in Russia to what's going on in our own personal chinuch Mesiras Nefesh. At that time, it was harder to grasp. But as I must say, as the years have gone by, and as Rabbi Kaplan mentioned before, in my capacity as what I deal with, I see what's going on in the world in a very, very front-line situation. I understand more and more that when the Rebbe writes in the Bible that we have to have Mesiras Nefesh for our own personal chinuch, you can understand much more what it entails, what it involves. A certain commitment certain dedication and devotion that we have to have ourselves in our own personal growth. Who we are as chassidim, who we are as parents, who we are as grandparents, what kind of examples are we setting, what kind of role models are we, what's going on in our homes. That's personal, that's chinuch atzmi, that we have to have a serious nefesh for that we have to be committed. Because we know yofa koyach haben mi koyach av. The child grows up from what he sees. This is Gemara in Masechet Shabbos. The Gemara says, "Arogel b'neir have a bon of Talmidei Chacham." Shenemar ki ner mitzvah b'toydor. Ner mitzvah. Where does it come from? B'toydor. The ner mitzvah. Arogel b'neir. If you're careful, Rashi says ner Shabbos, ner Chanukah, ner Yom Tov. So that helps that your children should be born of Talmidei Chacham. Kinei mitzvah Torah. So there's a mefarish on the in Yankiv, Ian Yankiv, that he says if it means ner Shabbos, ner Yom Tov, and ner Chanukah, so why doesn't it say in the Gemara Arogel b'ner Shabbos v'Yom Tov or Arogel b'ner Shabbos v'Chanukah? Have a born of Talmidei Chacham. Why doesn't it say it? So he offers another explanation in Yankiv. On the daf. What's his other explanation? He says, to be able to learn Tailoring at night, you have to have a candle. You can't do it in the dark. Harogel b'neir, somebody that the family sees all the time, that sits at night by the candle and learns. Harogel b'neir, they see a father that's learning. Have a bon of Talmidei Chachamim. That's what brings us children that are Talmidei Chacham. Because they see what's primary and what's secondary in the life of their parents. That's what Rogel b'neir. There was once an individual that wrote a letter to the Rebbe that he's very unhappy with what's going on in his house. Describe what's going on, his wife, his children, the chinuch, with the tznius, with the yonim for Yir Shamayim. I mean, he really described it with a dark picture. And he asked the Rebbe what he should do. And the Rebbe answers him back, and the Rebbe tells him, there's a klal. The Gemara brings down this rule, gufa bosar eishos. The body goes after the head. Shabbos, gufa bosar eishos. Body goes after the head. The Rebbe says, you're the Rosh HaBayis. You're the head of the house. If you 3 times a day tefillah b'tzibur, kviyas itim l'toyre, you have shiurim, you'll be careful about all your obligations, and you'll do it v'sadartzazah, what you're supposed to do, is gufa bosar eishos. The rest of the family will follow with you. You as the head, when you lift yourself up, the whole body will be lifted up. In another letter, the Rebbe writes it to a keres habayis. You're in a keres habayis, writes to a woman, and in what the keres habayis is involved in, it has a complete effect on what's going on in the rest of the house. It works side with oifin chiyuvi, and side with tzarei, and oifin shli. In a negative way also. Works in a positive way and negative. One of my sons he was learning in Bernois, in the yeshiva. And when you finish the 3rd year in Bernois, there's a kfutz of guys that they go to Frankfurt for a year in shlichus. Frankfurt, Germany. And my son was one of them. He went to Frankfurt. There was about 16 boys. They went. Now I was speaking to him on the phone, I understood what it means to be in a place like Frankfurt, Germany, out Shlichus 16 boys, because I was sent by the Rebbe in 1976-77 to open up a yeshiva in Seattle, Washington. We were 10. We opened up a yeshiva in Seattle. And Seattle, Washington was then a Emerson Midbar Shmona, a real desolate place when it comes to Yiddishkeit, comparatively speaking. And the Rebbe said, Dafka, that yeshiva should be in the university district, next to university, so that the students should be able to come in and we should be able to learn with them. So we weren't even in the section, the Jewish section, which is in the south end of town. We're in the north end of town. And we were 10 guys. That means no one could sleep in, because you have to have a minyan. And it means one guy messes up, it has a shpor on the whole yeshiva. So we had tremendous responsibility with him. But I also know what it means. I knew what it meant to be lonely, to be in a place where it can really knock you down. And as I was on the phone every so often with my son, I sensed that they have that problem. So I told my son, I was on my way, I had to take a trip to Chicago. So I told him, you know what? I'll fly through Frankfurt. And I'll spend the day in Frankfurt. And Farbrengen, give them chizik. And I said to him, you know what? So it was around Chof Tevis. So I said to him, maybe make for the community something like Maimonides, the Rambam. We'll talk about the Rambam, this and that. It's his yortzeit. And then it sits in Farbrengen. He says to me, a great idea. I wanted to give my son a chizik. I wanted him to understand something also. The young kids need their chizik. The older ones need theirs also. If it means flying, spending a couple of days, that's what you do. So, I flew to Frankfurt. Come to Frankfurt. I walk into my son picks me up at the airport. Come to this gigantic shul. A gigantic shul. I'm a big shul. It was one of the only buildings that lasted through Kristall Nacht. It was turned into it was a theater, it was a theater. But they gave it back to the Jewish community. Massive shul. It has a big, big shul with a dome. And then off to the sides, like a Beis Medrash. The Beis Medrash was probably something like the size of this room. It was more rectangular. And that's where the Bochum learned. And they had a Dita. They had a house not far from apartments where they stayed. My son actually slept in the building of the shul, a place for 2 or 3 rooms. So I walk into the shul with my son, and he tells me, don't help the Yid. He's an older Jew. He points him out to me. Tells me, and he's the Shia Katz. Tells me, as a Yid from the Carpathia, he's from the Carpathian Mountains. And he says he went through the Holocaust, and he went through the whole business. And he says he's a Zera Farbe Yid. He's very warm, and he takes care of us, mamish like a mother and a father. He sews buttons on her. He sees something's missing a button. He takes the bochum to doctors if they need to. He takes it to the pharmacy, buys the medicine. He comes every day into the kitchen to make sure that we have enough food. He says to me, he went through the Holocaust, so he had starke times of the neighbors. He says, but he does everything. He's the Shabbos Gab in the shul. Or if you can hear from him, Shar Ververte, take it with, understand where he's coming from. He says, I want you to go over to him and I want you to thank him for everything that he does for the Lord. So I walk over to him. Pshir, Shalom Aleichem. You heard from my son, Yosel, heard from my son. They said to him, you worry for the bocher, take care of him. And you know what I mean? When you give a compliment, you don't have to be cheap. In the house also, and also with your kids. Don't be cheap. Spell it out. I said to him, I heard you sew for the buttons on your clothing. You take them to the doctor. You take them to the pharmacy. You spell it out. You have to know how to give a car needs gas to run. So you have to know how to give the compliment. And I tell him everything that I heard from my son. So he says to me, Rebbe. And he was like, Rebbe. Just, it's not a new thing for me. He says, I grew up in the Carpathian Mountains. He says, mein Tate is given from the Gewirrstadt. I given the Gewirrstadt. From the Städte. He was the rich guy in this. He made wine, and my mama von backen, challes, von mitzvah. Our house turned into a bakery from Wednesday. And she baked challes for all the poor people in the city. And my father made wine. He had enough wine for all the poor people in the city. And my job was, from 4 years old, I went with a basket from house to house to the Ormalite in Stott, to the people, and I brought 3 challahs with a bottle of wine for each family that they should have. The basics for Shabbos. So he says to me, Sinishke knives. It's in my DNA. I grew up with that. I saw it since I'm 4 years old. Tells me it's a part of my life. I'm looking at a guy in Frankfurt, Germany. Went through the Holocaust. Was in the early 80s. At the time. He's sewing buttons on Bochum's suits. Taking him to the doctor. Buying the medicine. And what does he tell me? It's from when he was 4 years old and up. He grew up in a house where he saw helping poor people week in and week out. He saw a house that was dedicated and devoted towards helping you. So all that he went through all of his life, this is what remained in his genes. This is what it means. We talk about chinuch atzmi, our own personal, who we are, how much we have to work on ourselves to keep growing. The biggest school that we have, the biggest Talmud Torah, is our homes. Those are the breeding grounds. The Cheder in the Talmud Torah is to be mechazik what we're teaching in the houses. It's not, people think it's the opposite. Our homes are to be mechazik what's going on in the school. It's pum fakir. The Torah is chayim, the living Torah, is in our homes. The Torah in the books is in school. But the living Torah is our houses. It's our families. That's where they see what counts. Where are you? How much it's sincere? How much it really counts? How much are we living up to what we learn? It's in the house. And that's the Mesiras Nefesh, the commitment, the dedication is in the home. This is the real breeding grounds. My wife has an aunt, Alea Shul. She was very sick. She was already in the hospital in the last lap. She was in intensive care. She was in the last hours of her life. And I get a phone call. And she asked me that I should be able to come. The kids call me. My mother asked if you can come. She wants to ask a shayla and aloha. I said, yeah, what? She wants us that we should move her over to a different hospital. She's not happy where she is. So we told her, the Cheder zog of a kedish. Can't move her. Doctor said you can't. So she says, you'll figure it out. She wants to ask me. So they asked me to come. And I knew that she was in her last hours. I come straight to the hospital. I walk into the intensive care unit. She was in a big room. She was in the end of the room in the corner. She's hooked up to all the machines. She sees me from a distance in the corner of her eye. With her last koiches, the first thing she does when she sees me, she starts being the sadder. She says that the horizontal side zugedeckt wie sie da ist. That she should, her hair covering should be completely, without any problems. And I know she's in her last hours. This is what the doctors had told us. And I saw the effort that she went through to be able to cover till the end of her hair. He said, Dr. Stein, because I'm coming over. I said to him, as I was walking over, and I said, jetzt kann man verstehen, can understand how she was zoichet to such an army of children. Yidei Hashem, Hasidim, Manchi Maisen. I'm hot a mama, have a mother, that in the last minutes of her life, this is what's on her mind. This is where it comes from. When you see parents like that all the time, when you see such dedication and devotion, and such commitment, then it's Zois Chukas HaTorah. It's Chakikim. It's engraved lettering. It's not written lettering. It's part and parcel of what their life is. Because that's what they're seeing. Memela, the Chinuch Atzmi we have to have. It also works, I must say, it also works in the opposite way. I remember there was a couple that came in to me to speak to me in Rehovot. And they had a daughter that was on the way out, as we would say. A 16-year-old girl. And they came to speak to me about their daughter. And the mother went on and on describing to me the disastrous education that her daughter was getting in Beis Rivka in the high school. And the teachers, and the way they dealt with her, and the way they did this. And she went on and on. Mamish making, it was gefährlich, terrible, what she was describing to me, what the teachers were doing to her daughter. And I turned to her and I said to her, you know what? I said to her, we're not always in control of what's going on. Let's talk about certain things that we are in control of. I said to her, this was way back. I'm talking about a story of over 30 years ago. I said to her, this is before the technology age. I mean, before, internet. This was before that. I said to her, tell me, what kind of newspapers do you have in your house? What kind of books, novels do you have in your house? What kind of radio programs do you listen to? And she turns to me and she says to me, Rabbi, goes on in my bedroom is my business. What does that have to do with what I'm talking about? And I said to her, well, if you think that your kids don't know what's going on, you're making a big mistake. They sense, if you're living in compromise, they sense the compromise. And if you're allowed to round corners, then they can also round corners. And they pick which corners they want to round. Not necessarily the corners that you're interested in them rounding. But once you've taught them the concept that you don't have to take so serious everything. I remember when we were on Shlichus in Seattle, so they used to give us the Mezainis, Duncan Hines. And I remember one time we were sitting and looking at the box. It was like this fudge cake or brownies cake or something. We were looking at the ingredients and we saw that it says in a way. And it didn't say OUD. So we called up the OU office in New York. And we said to them, what's going on? It says in a way, so why doesn't it say OUD? It's a very small percentage they started to make it. The rabbi and said, Hezechai, he says, Kin groisa veros the nishgitor. I remember it became like a slogan by us. Kin groisa veros the nishgitor. So I said, what do you call it? Once you show that there's room for compromise, then the concept of compromise becomes an educational tool that our children learn. If my parents can compromise, I can also compromise. But I'm going to pick where I want to compromise. They're not going to choose for me where I compromise. Just like they decided where they want to compromise, I'll compromise where I want to compromise. Memela, when the Rebbe says that we have to have Mesiras Nefesh for Chinuch Atzmi, for our own personal Chinuch, we have to realize that all of our own lives have a direct effect on our children. The Rebbe writes in a letter and he says, somebody wrote it to the Rebbe from Eretz Yisrael that he has a child that's in the east of the west coast of the United States, and Nebuchadnezzar fell in, he got involved with a shiksa, he wants to get married to a shiksa. And the Rebbe writes back to the parents and he says to them, he gives them all kinds of like practical advice first. He says to them, you have to try to get some of his friends to talk to them about the danger of what intermarriage is, and also if he can get, and he should know that it's coming from you, and also if he can, to get him to find somebody that can introduce him to Jewish girls, that he should be able to see that he can get married to a fine Jewish girl, not have to look just for a goyish girl, a shiksa. And then the Rebbe says, with all that aside, with all the practical things, he says you should realize that a parent and a child are connected on a soul level. And because we're connected on a soul level, whatever a parent does affects a child at the other end of the world also, even if he doesn't even know it. So if you will be mechazik yourself and add on to Torah mitzvahs when you are in Eretz Yisrael, it will have a direct effect on the soul level, on your son, also to elevate him where he's living on the West Coast in the United States. We're connected on a soul level. So even now, our dedication and devotion, our commitment to Yiddishkeit and to Chassidishkeit and to Yerushalayim affects our children on a soul level. Even now, even if they're out of the house, long gone, it affects them also. The Friedrich Rebbe came for the first time to the United States in 1929. 28-29. He came towards the end of the summer, and he went around the United States during that year to all different towns, visiting the cities to see the matzah of the Yiddishkeit in those cities. He was in a lot of towns. He was in Chicago, he was in St. Louis, he was in Philadelphia, he was in New Jersey. a lot of towns. Baltimore. And he came, when he came to the city of Philadelphia, this might have heard from my father. When he came to Philadelphia, there was a lady, a very wealthy lady, that she gave her house away for the Friedrich Rebbe to be there for the 2 weeks that he was in Philadelphia. And it was in the center of town, and there was a lot of write-ups about Friedrich Rebbe in the local newspapers. It was right close to 1927. Friedrich Rebbe was arrested and killed. So the Friedrich Rebbe was talked about as being the leader of the underground in Russia and a hero. Somebody put his life on the line. And had a picture of the Friedrich Rebbe. And they also wrote the hours that the Friedrich Rebbe is accepting people for yechidus, for brochas, shuls. And they came to, so there was a group of high school students that they saw the article. And they decided they want to have some fun. So let's go. Because it was a little difficult for them that there was such a fuss being made about our rabbi, our Rebbe from the Altahim, from the old country. They're the new generation, Americans. So they came to the Friedrich Rebbe to the house, and there was a lot of people in the house. They couldn't even get into their house, so they were outside on the porch. And as high school students, they began to raise a ruckus between themselves, joking around, high school students. And the Friedrich Rebbe on the second floor heard through the window that there's noise going on out downstairs. So he sent his Gabbai downstairs to see what's going on. Came downstairs, and he sees these high school students. He walks over to them. He says to them, what do you want? What's going on? They said, we came to see the rabbi. What? We have some questions in Judaism to ask him. Child, the Yiddishkeit. And the Gabbai wasn't a fool. He sized them up. And he went back upstairs. And he told the Friedrich Rebbe that these guys came, these high school students downstairs, and they said that they came because they have some shilas in Yiddishkeit, Judaism. Friedrich Rebbe said to the Gabbai, that's what they said. He says, yeah. So you know what? Stop the yechidus right now. Stop the people from coming in. Stop the law. Let them come in immediately. And they came into he schlepped them in. Pushed themselves through the crowd. They came upstairs. As they came upstairs, the Friedrich Rebbe, when they came into the room, the Friedrich Rebbe picked himself up and he started to give them chairs to sit down. And when they saw the Friedrich Rebbe, they said, the Rebbe, you don't have to give us chairs, we'll take care of ourselves. The Friedrich Rebbe said to him, people come to me, I want to give them at least a chair. If I can't give you, something with the drink, at least a chair. And the Friedrich Rebbe took care and gave everyone a chair. When they sat down, their plans dissolved. Because they saw the Friedrich Rebbe and they're quiet. So then the Friedrich Rebbe said, on my table you see right now, there's a lot of letters on the table. A lot of those letters are letters that people ask me questions in health issues. And I tell people, what are you coming to me for? I'm not a doctor. You should go to a professional. Go to a professor. People that have experience. And they tell me, they insist, but they want to hear what I have to say. She says, I have obviously so if they insist, I tell them. She says, then I have people that come to me in these letters, and they ask me questions in business. And I tell them, what are you coming to me for? I'm not in business. I speak to a successful businessman, has experience, and ask him. But they insist, and they say, Rebbe, we want to hear what you have to say. So I have obviously so I tell them. The noch a Frau mention, There's people that come to me, and they tell me that they have issues, legal issues. So I tell them I'm not a lawyer, but a professional lawyer. And again, they insist, so I tell them. He says, but you people, you came to me for education. That's my field. I'm a mechanech. I'm a son of a mechanech. I'm a grandson of a mechanech. I'm a great-grandson of a mechanech. I go back generations in the field of education. So you guys came from my field. Most of the people outside that are waiting to get into me, they're going to talk to me about everything almost except for my field. That's why I stopped the line and I let you people come in first. Because you are coming for my expertise. And then the Friedrich said, he said, what should I tell you? He says, can I teach you the whole Torah on one foot? I want to leave you with a message in education for the rest of your lives. And the Friedrich says, people think that I'm a big tzaddik. I'm not such a big tzaddik. But one thing I can say, I know that there's 613 mitzvahs that a person has to do. And I aspire the whole time to try to get to a full completion of keeping those mitzvahs. And I work on myself the whole time. I'm climbing a mountain. And even though that I haven't reached the peak, but I never stop climbing. I never stop growing. He says. And that is my message. All of you have to keep growing. A sign of life is growth. Those that aren't putting on film should start putting on film. Those that are already putting on film should come to shul to daven. Once a week, twice a week. Those that are already davening, if only shachas, mincha ma'ariv, a shir Torah. Keep growing. Don't stagnate. That's what it's all about. They left the room. My father, Oliver Sholem, told me that one of them took the Friedrich so serious, they became a full-fledged Lubavitcher. But each and every one of the students that were there, all were moved. Years later, after being harassed, when I used to tell this story over the why it isn't printed anywhere, and why everyone hasn't heard about it, and where do you know the story from? I would get harassed until I came to South Africa, and I met Rabbi Fishman from Philadelphia, and he knew one of the guys that was inside in the Yechidus, and he showed me the Jewish press where the guy writes the story. And he also told me that the guy used to sit next to him in the Lubavitcher Shul in Philadelphia. And the guy told him that he was a high school student that was paying his way through school by working in a dental appliance company. And he went over to his boss on Erev Shabbos that week. And he told him, I'm not coming in tomorrow to work. He says, why? He says, it's Shabbos. He says, well, you're not religious. You've been working till now. He says, listen, I was by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he told us this week, you got to keep growing, you can't stand in one place. And I decided I'm not going to work at Shuls. So the owner of the dental appliance company was a Jewish guy. He says, you're not going to work, and I'm going to be the Shabbos good. He says, if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for me too. And he closed the company. Closed the company for Shabbos. The word was, we got to keep growing. We can't live on interest. Ribbis is awesome in Torah. You can't just live on what you learned when you were a bocher. Oh, Parshas Bullet. I remember there was a sikh in Chazan Dibur Tzavord. That's called living on ribbis, living on interest. And the Vach, every week, it's got to be a sikh. Chalpachas, one sikh, Megei Durch, Belantis. Or the two sikhs from the Likud sikhs that everyone's learning. And if it's too difficult to go through a long sikha, there's books out today that you learn through, you read through. can assist you. It can't stay in one place. If you want to be from Tzemach Agudas Chabad, from the Lubavitch Youth Organization, it means keeping growing. When you start talking about just what you accomplished in the past, you know, the Amulik Yor, this Amulik Yor, like this. You can't just talk about past accomplishments. You got to be alive today. Keep growing. That was the lesson, that was the message that the Frierdiker Rebbe gave. The Chinuch Atzmi is to keep growing. And to be committed to keep growing. And if we don't know exactly what to do, Asil Charav, talk it over with your mashpia, talk it over with a good friend. What can I do? What's reality? What's not chewing nuts? What's not overreacting? What is reality that I can take upon myself that I can? We just started now the Rambam again. What's reality when it comes to that? What can I take upon myself? That I should be able to be consistent about it. Chaim, Chaim.
Mine's on the floor. Time. Okay. It wasn't an all-time liver. He knows what he's doing.
Standing in the choir.
He's got
Cheder l'chaim, l'chaim. Is nog een ding. Stubborn, not stable microphone. I guess I just a whole cup of water fell on me. So you know, Baal Shem Tov says when you have water, you sing a bracha. Push it, cousins, cousin, nephew. Cheder. Frierdiker Rebbe told over in the name of the Rebbe Rashab. He said that just like one has the obligation of putting on tefillin every day, one also has the obligation of thinking about a half hour every day about the chinuch of his family, of his children, to do the utmost, and even more than the utmost, to be able to make sure that you go in the way of Derech Hashem. So there's a sikha from the Rebbe that the Rebbe talks about, and he says, why did the Rebbe Rashab say, just like we have the mitzvah of tefillin every day, we also have the obligation to think about every day a half hour for the kids. Why the mitzvah of tefillin? He could have said, just like we have the mitzvah of Krishma every day, so we have the mitzvah of thinking about our children. Why did he use the mitzvah of tefillin? So first, before I tell you what the Rebbe answers, I want to give an observation on my own something. You know, everyone talks about this famous statement that the Rebbe Rashab said, that person, just like he has a mitzvah of tefillin, has an obligation to do half an hour every day. I think that the Frierdiker Rebbe the Rebbe Rashab was talking to the men. Because to the women, to mothers, you don't have to tell them to think about their children a half hour every day. They never stop thinking about their children. I mean, I can tell you that from my experience. Most of the people that call me up about problems that they're having with the chinuch of their children, about 90%, it's the mothers that are calling. With Sardine. They don't need it to be told they have to think a half hour every day. They never take their minds off their children. But we have to appreciate that. But going back to what the Rebbe says, why did the Rebbe pick the Frierdiker Rebbe? Why did the Rebbe Rashab pick a half hour of comparing it to tefillin? So the Rebbe says in the Sikha, it's a Sikha in Noach Chelik Aleph, Noach Chelik Aleph, Likud Sikhas. The Rebbe says, part of the mitzvah of tefillin is Shibud Alei B'Noach. Put that tefillin on our hands, next to the heart, to be able to give over our hearts to Hashem, our emotions. We put our tefillin on our heads to be able to give over our moich, our minds to Hashem. It's part of the mitzvah of tefillin. It says it's part of the etzem mitzvah. Shibud Alei B'Noach. So the Rebbe says, Yesh Loimar, that's why the Rebbe Rashab picked the mitzvah of tefillin more than any other mitzvah, because he was really letting us know also that when it comes to thinking about our children for a half hour every day, we're not just talking about stum thinking. We're talking about shibud alei v'moich to the education of our children. Of giving over our minds and our hearts to the education of our children. Shibud alei v'moich. To subjugate our mind and our hearts to them. And you know, there's leiv and there's moich. There's our hearts and our minds. I'll tell you, I give you just to share with your thought. You're talking about having your heart. You know, one of the most important things when it comes to create our children, our families, is that we have to be connected. We have to be connected to what's going on in their lives. Now, a child tells you that he's going on a school trip, for example. Or you're sitting with him to learn with him for a test, for example. You come home after a day's work, you haven't seen your child for example, for 8, 9, 10 hours. You come home, I mean, du bist den ganzen verdreht mit deinen Sachen. You have your things that you're involved in. When you come home, I always tell you the light, I say to them, when you come home, before you walk into the house, you know, try to go like this. Make a reset. Stop for a second with all you were involved in. Reset and realize you're walking into the house. Who are you going to meet in the house? You're going to meet your wife, your children. Each one of them went through a full day. When you left the house in the morning, your wife told you she has a headache, or she told you she has to go to the doctor. One of the kids, she told you 2 or 3 things she threw at you. You make the reset. Walk into the house. Walk into the house. Shalom. Hi. I'll be honest with you, the first thing I ask whenever I walk into my house, first thing I ask, even if my kids are sitting in the dining room together with my wife, first thing I ask, where's mommy? That's the first thing I ask. When I had the kids in the house. Where's mommy? And why did I ask? Sometimes she's right in front of my face. Because I want them to know when Ta comes home, the first thing that he asks, where's mommy? She's number 1. That's the first thing. That's a fazait seher. No matter what. And I can tell you that I've been told many times by my wife that it warms her heart that that's the first thing they ask. No matter what. You know, and I don't have the kitchen's not in front of my eyes, but it's like off the dining room. So I hear the sink or I hear what's working. I know she's there. I walk in. Where is she? That's the first message. Then you walk into the house. You meet one of your children. You had a test at it. You know that. How did it go? How was the test? How were the questions? What were the things that were asked? Tell me a little about it. I want to hear. Another kind kid comes over. How was your trip today, your school trip? Tell me about it, I want to hear. And you sit down and listen. That's called that you live. Your heart is with them. That you're thinking about them. That they're on your mind. That their lives is part of your lives. They're not living separate lives. They have their lives, but you're a part of what's going on in their lives. When you stay connected to them, they stay connected to you. If you want them to share their lives with you and you take an interest, then they'll share their lives with you. But if you're not interested in sharing their lives, then they learn to find other people that will share their lives with them. And not necessarily will it be the people that you're the most interested in that they should share their lives with. But they're looking to share their lives with somebody. So by you sharing their lives, you're part of their lives. And if they're mechuber to you, they're connected to you, they're not only connected to you, they're connected to all the values that you stand for. But if they don't feel that connection, then they find others to connect to, and also eventually to connect to the values of those that they're connected to. So part of Shibud Alev HaMoich is in the hearts, also that we should be connected as much as we can. And it's just a matter of, and it works also in Shalom Bayis and Yonah Moichet. A husband that comes home and asks his wife, how did you go by the doctor's office? How was it? How's it? You said in the morning you had a headache. How are you feeling? Oh, this is a person that's connected. That even though he was out of the house, he's nevertheless connected. if you're connected, so you get the connection back. Kemayim aponim aponim, kein leivodim lo'odim. Also geht es. Das ist ein Cheder von der Shibud Alev HaMoich. It's part of the Shibud Alev HaMoich. Then there's another Nikud. This Chanuch L'nar Al Pi Darkei. You know, we have once a year, we have a mitzvah, Vigada de Levincha, to sit down with our children to tell them the story about Yitzias Mitzrayim. What does it say at the beginning, at the Agodah, when we start the Keneged Arba Bonim? We say, Keneged Arba Bonim Divrei. That when you want to speak to your kids to tell them about Yitzias Mitzrayim, you got to know there's different kinds of kids. Each one asks different kinds of shilas, and each one has to get a different kind of an answer. The Baal HaGodah, Vigada de Levincha, the mitzvah to speak to your children right at Yitzias Mitzrayim, he lets you know before you start the whole big ordeal, Keneged Arba Bonim Divrei. You got to speak to the four sons. You got to realize what you're talking to. Daf nitzen the kop, Shibud HaMoich, to understand who am I dealing with. What kind of a way to talk to them? Each one gets an individual type of a way. That's the Keneged Arba Bonim Divrei. It's right in front of us every year when we say Agodah. But when we say Agodah, we're paying lip service. But the bottom line is that that's the message. The message is that we have to be able to tailor of what's going on. And it's Chanuch L'nar Al Pi Darkei. I'll tell you. There's a letter from the Rebbe to a lady that she was becoming a preschool teacher. As we say in Eretz Yisrael, a ganenet. We're a preschool teacher. Kindergarten, nursery, pre-1A. But today, by the time they get to grade 1, they're already graduates from university. And they have BAs or MAs already. The amount of years that they go through already. So this lady was learning to become a preschool teacher. Or she was already a preschool teacher. And she asks her Rebbe, a bracha from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe tells her, when it comes to preschool age, the Iker Chinuch is consistency. Of course, we spice things up by telling them stories and talking to them. But the Iker Chinuch, when it comes to that age, is consistency. Being consistent. And by being consistent, the Rebbe writes in this letter, it engraves in the children all the nyonim of mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim. It becomes oisius chakika with the consistency. I remember once I was sitting with at a meeting of all the preschool teachers in Eretz Yisrael in the Lubavitcher preschools. And one of the preschool teachers gets up and she says to me, how do we deal with the fact that we have children come back on Monday, actually Eretz Yisrael's on Sunday, come back on Sunday to school, and we open up their school bag, and we see all the papers of what they did, the work that they did during the week, folded up just the way we put it into their school bags. It wasn't touched. Parents didn't even see it. What do we do? Another teacher asks me, what do we do that we have children that are constantly coming late? Children are being brought in different times of the day. What do we do? I say to them, the Rebbe writes in a letter about, somebody asked the Rebbe about children coming late to school. The Rebbe says, you have to realize it's most of the times it's not even the children's fault. If they're coming late, it's because the parents don't have their act together. It's not the children. they begin the oynis. There's a lot of places that there's no consistency in the house. There's no real bedtime. Sometimes you go to sleep at 7, sometimes at 9, sometimes at 11. It's up for grabs, as we say. Sometimes the papers are taken out for Shabbos, sometimes not. Sometimes the Nagelwasser is sometimes not. Sometimes Birchas Hamazon, sometimes not. Sometimes Moedani, yes, sometimes not. The lack of consistency. The Rebbe writes about in the younger age, preschool age, the most important thing when it comes to chinuch is consistency. Ikviyut, tmidiyut, constant consistency. And the lotion that the Rebbe uses, he says, and then it becomes oish ischike, becomes nechak, becomes engraved into our children. Once it's consistent. No, versteht sich, everyone understands, we're not living in police states. It's done b'darki noim, b'darki sholom, but in a consistent manner. That's the name of the game in the young childhood education. Chanuch l'nar al pi darka. Von zweiten Seite. There's a letter from the Rebbe. When the Rebbe talks about the teenage years, the Rebbe talks about, he says, there's a letter that he talks about, I think it was in Montreal. There was a bocher that wanted to go to New York for this Kislev. And then the whole of the yeshiva wasn't happy with it because it took them out of their learning and it would shake them up for a good couple of days, and they didn't know how to deal with it because they saw the bocher want to go. On the other hand, they saw what it'll do to them. They're going. So they wrote to the Rebbe. So the Rebbe writes back and he says that we're living in a day and age here in the United States where it's not so easy for the younger generation, Kabbalah soul, accepting authority. This is in the 60s. What should we say today? They're not interested in accepting authority. The Rebbe says especially they have a strong will to be able to come here because a lot of them, their families are here too. So they want to be able to come to be able to also to see their families. The Rebbe is very humble about them wanting to see their families. So the Rebbe says, so instead of making xeris that are going to be very hard to accept because it's hard to accept authority, try to use their will of wanting to come here as a catalyst to cash in on. Tell them, okay, but they have to learn a certain amount of Galat Gemara by heart or be tested. Kama Perok and Tanya, that they should learn Malpeh. In other words, use their want and will to surf on it, as we would say, and to be able to take from it without having to break their will. Because the acceptance of authority in the American youth today is not so simple. In another letter, the Rebbe writes to Reb Nissen. Reb Nissen tells the Rebbe that he sees older bochum that they're doing things that he doesn't feel are right. But he's skeptical about telling them to answer it because maybe it's a gzeira she'ein tzibur yochel lamed bo. It's not something that can be accepted by the tzibur. So the Rebbe writes back to him and he says to him, Bizgerech, the Rebbe tells him, you're right, that there are certain things that gzeira she'ein tzibur yochel lamed bo. And he says, the Gemara even says that B'Chananya v'Shol v'Azariah ilmol inogdu, if they wouldn't just be thrown one time into the furnace, into the hot fire, but they would have been afflicted with Yisurim, then they wouldn't have stood up to the test, because it's constant. So the Rebbe says, Ein Chanami, you have to take into account that when you're going to Gzeiris, if it's too much constant, They might not stand up to it. So what should you do? So the Rebbe tells them like this. The Rebbe tells them there are certain things that you're able to let them know that you're not happy with. But you're not going to exist. They should know you're not happy with it. But you didn't put your foot down. They know you're not happy. And eventually, you'll get them there. In other words, it depends which age. When you're talking about a young child, consistency. You know what they say? That independence with immaturity is a dangerous shidduch. But when you're talking about already the older years, then there's got to be the juggle. The chanuch l'nei pi dark. And there's the shibud alei v'avoy, how to get to it. And there's taking counsel, taking advice, saying charav, and taking into account each child with his milas and his chesroinus. And we're dealing today in a day and age. You've got ADHD, you've got OCD, you've got all kinds of things going around today. You have to be able to take into account. And you can't be in action. That this is the way it's going to be and not that way. And you have to be able to be open to hear different suggestions. This is a chelik for the chanuch l'nei pi darka. You know, I once came to California for a Shabbaton. So the young man, the shliach, takes me to the mikveh. He said, drops me up at the mikveh. It was Erev Shabbos. Tells me, go to the mikveh. I walk into the mikveh, and as I walk into the mikveh, there's a little child, screeching and screaming. I run into the mikveh. I hear somebody screaming. I walk into the mikveh, and I see there's a father with his 3-year-old son in the water, and he's holding his 3-year-old son. And he's saying, "Close your eyes, close your mouth." And the kid is screaming, and plumps him into the water. So I run over and said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" He says, "What am I doing? I'm toiling in the mikveh." So I say to him, if you want to make sure that your son will never want to go to the mikveh, carry on doing what you're doing. What are you, crazy? And he said, "Well, you're crazy, because das heißt, won't finish your phone." I said to him, "Listen." He said to him, "He's only 3, he's not mechuyev in a mikveh. B'chlal, nish poshet, a father and a son. But the mishnarayim in them." He said to him, "But you know what? You want him to go to the mikveh? For a 3-year-old, if he sits on the top step with his feet in the water, that's the mikveh. That's his mikveh. Well, decide to put his knees in, that'll be the next level of his mikveh. And when he decides to go up to here, that'll be his mikveh. What are you? Chanuch l'nei pi darka. What is he, a mini adult? He's a child. He's mechuyev. Many times people ask me about the moshel. Birchas hamazon, davening. And I'll be honest with you. It's chanuch l'nei pi darka. There are children that love to read. They love it. It's like to them, and then there are kids that they don't like to read. And I always relate and I say to them, I want you to know something. When I was a kid growing up, all the small letters didn't exist back then. You know, the Rebbeinu Shalom after Vahi Achar Dvorim didn't count. It wasn't user-friendly. The Asher Volotzion from Mincha Shabbos wasn't user-friendly. V'Yoshe B'Seiser V'Ata Kodesh after Ma'ariv Shabbos wasn't user-friendly. I didn't even see it. It's called, they call it, there's a word, in Hebrew they call it when you have these advertisements, banners, that people are blind to banners. I don't even see it. I don't see it. I, as a kid, did not see the small words. Only the big words I saw. It wasn't good as the small words. Not only that, even the big words. Every second or third one. It took time. It took time to grow up. It took time to get there. I had some of my, some of my kids by Birchas Hamazon, they would sit, they would hold the bencher, and that was it. And my other kids, the ones that are they were the ones, the supervisors, they would tell me, Tate, he's not benching, tell him to bench. And I wouldn't say anything. And they would tell me again, tell him to bench. Or he's not davening, tell him to daven. He's just holding the sitter. And I wouldn't say anything until finally I would tell him. Ich bin der Tate. I'll decide when to tell him. I hear. Let me make the decision when I'm going to tell him. There are some kids that holding the bencher, that's their bencher. That holding the sitter, that's their daven. The Chinuch l'naro pidarke. You got to be able to, listen, we're the umpires. So you got to be careful. It's a rough call sometimes. It's a strike or a ball. But you got to be able to maneuver. That's part of the Chinuch l'naro pidarke. To be able to assess the situation and to know where to stand. A Shabbos table. Make them sit a whole table. There's all. What are they, mini adults that they can sit through a couple hours at a table? This is a Cheder. Beginning of the meal, you gear the table at the beginning of the meal towards them. You take out the notes that they came from Cheder at the beginning of the table. You show them the work that they did, the drawings that they gave, the different things. You show it to the rest of the family. At the beginning of the table, you tell a maisa. A story is always something that's for all ages. And then they can play on the side. And they're absorbing Shabbos and even playing on the side next to the Shabbos table. They hand in the Gunim and the Zmiris, and they see and they hear everything. It's coming in through the skin. There's the Monsey with the Farbrengen Rebbe when he was a child at 4 years old. It was a Farbrengen, Simchas Beis Hashem in the Sukkah. And the Farbrengen Rebbe was sitting next to his father, the Rebbe Rashab, in Russia, in Lubavitch, in the Sukkah. And it was cold. And the Rebbetzin came, his mother, and she wanted to take her child in. It was only a 4-year-old boy. And he fell asleep. He was sleeping next to the Rebbe Rashab while the Farbrengen was going on. And she wanted to take him in. And the Rebbe Rashab made like this, lost, let him stay. And the Rebbetzin said to her husband, the Rebbetzin Shtei and Soda, she said to the Rebbe Rashab, it's fakil. He's going to get a cold. It's cool in the sukkah. It's cold. And the Rebbe Rashab said back to her, von der Warmkeit von der Chassidische Farbrengen in Simchas Beis Hashem, it's gewoon warm von sein ganzes Leben. From the warmth of the Chassidische Farbrengen in Simchas Beis Hashem in the sukkah, he'll keep himself warm for the rest of his life. He was sleeping at 4 years old. Tell me, what kind of a Chassidische Farbrengen was he listening to that he's going to keep warm for the rest of his life? He was absorbing the atmosphere through his skin, through his ears as he was sleeping. The atmosphere of a Shabbos table can be absorbed as the children are playing next to the table or falling asleep on the couch. I never took my kids into the bedroom on Friday night. I let them fall asleep on the couch. Anyone that knows, it's a gewaltige Tailoring to fall asleep on the couch on Leil Shabbos. And I let my kids always fall asleep on the couches next to the Shabbos table. That they should absorb the Shabbos atmosphere even at the youngest age. And not always are they capable to be able to sit through the whole Geschäft. You gotta be able to tailor it to the age that it should be enjoyable and not that they feel that they're forced. Und so geht es euch mit den Damen, mit den Menschen, lat. Incentives also. I remember when I was a kid growing up, my father, every Shabbos Mevorchen, when we were younger, we used to get, for every 2 kapitlach, a penny. When he got a little older, every 3 kapitlach, a penny. And then it got a little older, it was every 4 kapitlach, a penny. He slowly weaned us. And you know what 75 cents was in those days? It was a nice sum of money. Or 50 cents. It was a nice sum of money. In those days when I was growing up, chocolate bars were 5 cents. I don't know what you buy today for 5 cents, but what do you call it? In those days. And that's how we slowly got into it. Incentives. My father, Rabbi Sholem, when we came to Toronto, he started organizing a mitzvah Shabbos in the house. So maybe in Eretz Yisrael, you make a mitzvah Shabbos in your house, or a place like Monsey. The Gegend. But when we lived in a place where, the Gegend is nicht gewesen, alle Frumi. My father went around the neighborhood, gathering kids together for the mitzvah Shabbos. And he had tremendous success. In the beginning, he was reaching like 60, 70 kids. And it wasn't the guys that, were putting on our Rabbi Tammuz. It was kids that were coming from completely not from backgrounds. And he wrote to the Rebbe about it. Mitzvah Shabbos with us. And a couple of months went by, he went into Yechidus. And the Rebbe, in the middle of Yechidus, the Rebbe asks him, the Rebbe on his own, the Rebbe asks him, what's going on with the Mitzvah Shabbos? And my father tells him, so this little Odi Shvach came less than 20, 30 kids. So the Rebbe looks at me and tells him, are you giving prizes at the end of the Mitzvah Shabbos? The Rebbe starts telling kids like pens, pencils, erasers, versteht sich, he tells, the Rebbe tells, not on Shabbos, aber Monsey Shabbos, Sunday, können sie hereinkommen and come into the house to get their present, their prizes. The Rebbe takes an incentive on his own, asks him what's going on in Mitzvah Shabbos, and gives him different suggestions. The Chanuch Lenar al Pidarke. Not only that, sometimes a good word. Das ist euch. A prize doesn't have to only just be a gashmisnike Sach. A good compliment. I mean, we, even as adults, when our parents would give us a good word, how proud they are for what we're doing and the different things, it would warm our hearts. So, why shouldn't it be in the house like that? Why do we have to take for granted all the good things that are going on? And we just know how to criticize the things that aren't going on. The good things that are going on, we have to also be able to appreciate and to be able to say it. I was once at I went to a Sefer Cheder, and I came with one of my young sons. He was about 5-year-old at the time. And at the end of the Sefer Cheder, there was a student. This was a shul that all of my boys used to chazer chassidus in the shul. It was a Sephardish shul that used to go there on Shabbos and to say it's a sicha by Shalashudis. So my family was connected to this shul from one son to the next. I was never there. All my kids would go there, and they invited me to come for this Achlas Sefer Torah, and I came. And they were in the process of building the shul. So in the Suda, the Gabba gets up and he starts making a public auction, not an auction. Like, Amisha Beirich, who's going to give money for developing and building the shul. This guy donates windows, and this guy donates doors, and everyone's donating something. As I'm sitting at this, in the Suda, the donations, so my son, my 5-year-old son, he schleps me by my pants, and I took him, he says to me, Tati, ich will euch geben. I also want to give. So I tell him, what do you mean? He says, no, I want to donate for the building of the shul. What? I said, no, said, where do you have money? He says, Chop the Chanukah geld. It was in the middle of the winter. He says, Chop the Chanukah. I said, how much money do you want to give? He said, 20 shekel. I said, so lift up your hand. People lifting up their hand. He was embarrassed. So I told him, we'll lift up our hands together. So we lift up our hands together. So I say to him, my son wants to give 20 shekel. And he's patiently, obviously, I give one. My son's giving me, I have to chayik him on the door. I can't get away with murder. So I also gave. So the guy makes a mishabed, chamiseinu, and basically they hold the 9 yards. These guys know how to do. And he gives us 20 shekel. Right? We finish the suda. We walk out. We walk into the car. And I tell my son, you know what? He said, I want to tell you. I'm Poshit. What you just did, you're probably the youngest donor to this shoe. And you did it on your own. No one even asked you. It was your own incentive. I told him, I salute you. It's unbelievable. To me, I said to him, that was the most important thing that happened by this Achnos Sefer. Come back to the house. Walk into the house. My wife says to me, how was the Achnos Sefer? Something happened by the Achnos Sefer. I can't even tell you. Something out of this world. She says to me, what? My son is standing there. They started donating for the shoe. And our own son, out of his own incentive, he went and gave from his Chanukah geld 20 shekel. And Amish did it on his own. No one said a word to him. Out of his own. He's sitting up there. And he's enjoying the. Anyways, of course, thank God, my wife gave a good reaction also. And then comes to the Shabbos table. Shabbos table, all the Cheder came home. Shivas, it's not everyone's in the house, a couple of guests. And I tell over the table, there was Achnos Sefer Torah, and they tell over the whole story. My son gave a donation on his own incentive. Valda Gezach, he's probably the youngest donor in the shul. He's sitting there. So one of my older boys comes over to me this side. Afterwards, he tells me, Tate, he says, you give them yeshes. You're making a Molgaina. That's just the, you know what I mean? He comes with the article, he gives them yeshes. I told him, don't worry. When he comes to yeshiva, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to do a bit like yesh. My job is to build them up. There's going to be along the way a lot of people that are going to cut them down. My job is to build them up. Not always a prize is a gashmiznik prize. A good word, a compliment, recognizing and giving recognition to the good things. There were gems. Just like ourselves, like I said. Mein Tate hat gesagt gute Sachen when he saw what I was doing. That was worth more than all the money. And we have to remember that too. I'm not going to say that money's not, it doesn't open doors. I'm not going to say that. Das Cheder for the Chinuch Lenar al Pi Darka. Aber we have to recognize the fact that a good word, recognition, a word of praise goes very far. Not only in chinuch but also in shalom bayis too. We shouldn't be cheap. We should be able to know how to use it because it's another tool of how it gives incentive and it gives a chayes and motivation to be able to carry on further. And we are like cars. It's not enough that we filled up gas a week ago. We got to fill up the car again. That's how it works. You can't just say because I gave a word of praise 2 weeks ago. B'chlal, the klal is for every word of criticism, 4 words of praise. That balances off the schwerkeit when it comes to the criticism. And if not, it's not balanced. And that's a chinuch for chinuch l'na'al pidarki. And that's a chinuch of Shimon Alev HaMoich. That's all part of it. Shimon Alev HaMoich. And then there's one more suggestion as we're talking about a practical suggestion. There are so many letters from the Rebbe on chinuch. Hundreds of letters on chinuch. It's one of the most biggest topics that the Rebbe talks about. As I mentioned before, expertise, my field. In the Igris, we have an index on chinuch. We have a sefer called Shari Chinuch. I suggest to every single parent and every single grandparent to have a kviz, a letter a day. Read a letter on chinuch. It'll give you insight. It'll help you to be part of the Rebbe being mechanech you how to give the chinuch. And it'll give us the tools to be able to be mitzliach in the chinuch. Sifri chinuch, to read, is part of the Shibud Alev HaMoich of the half hour. Taking time to read a book on chinuch. To learn about Inyan chinuch. That's part of the half hour a day. And that's how was the Rebbe gesagt. The Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, who was Makashet Tefillah. The Mendel, when we talk about Mesiras Nefesh for Chinuch Atzmi, and Mesiras Nefesh for Chinuch, Ibe darf sich übergeben. You know, it's not popcorn. It's nefoshes. And the Eibishter hat uns gegeben. He gave us a pikodin, and we have to take care of it. Avdecha Orav Sanar, the Rebbe speaks about this here. Yehuda was Moshe Nefesh to save Binyamin because Avdecha Orav Sanar. So the Rebbe says, just like Avdecha Orav Sanar, Yehuda said, I took responsibility for my brother. So the Rebbe says every parent has the personal responsibility for his children. And just like Yehuda was willing to put his life on the line to be able to save Binyamin, the Rebbe says, Avdecha Orav Sanar, we took responsibility for our kids, and we gotta work on it. And if we're stuck, then we take counsel. Then we look for ways how to change, how to rectify, how to do things in a better way. We look, we take counsel, we change our ways, we try our best. That's part of life. Yagaitu matzosim. And at the end of the day, the Eibishter helps when he sees that we're putting our minds and our hearts and we're trying our best, and he gives us a siyata d'shmaya that we should be matzliach also. Chaim b'chaim. Started in action. So it's a license. one of the things that the Rebbe asks, as we're getting ready for Yemei Bein HaMitzorim, in 3 weeks, and we hope Yehovcha Yom Elul Sos Simcha. But one of the things that we know that the Rebbe always asks from us is that in the 3 weeks we should be learning things that have to do with the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rebbe always quotes the Medrash that says that by us learning about the Beis HaMikdash and the way it was built and all the different rooms and everything, it's where we're involved in building of the Beis HaMikdash. So it's the way that we're Mekayim the mitzvah of being Beis HaMikdash today, by learning about the Beis HaMikdash, and the most appropriate time is in the 3 weeks. At the beginning of Masechta Midas and Masechta Tamid, Masechta Midas is primarily all about the tzur of the Beis HaMikdash. Masechta Tamid is about avoiding Tamid. But both of the Masechtas start off with the mitzvah of Shmiras HaMikdash, watching over the Mikdash. There was 24 places where there was shoyim in the Mikdash. 21 of them Leviim, 3 Kahanim. And so the Rambam brings down and he says, what does the Beis HaMikdash need shoyim for? What does it need shoyim? The Rambam says, Eine bedoime Palten shel melech that has shoyim to a palten shel melech that doesn't have shoyim. It's the royal guard. I mean, there are people that fly all the way to London just to watch the change of guard in Buckingham Palace. The royal guard. Watch. Shoyim. It's covered for the Beis HaMikdash. L'havdol of those. I was a whole masor, a dugma, and l'mat masor at foch. It's world. It's honor. Covered. We all have houses that are mostly mikdash v'shechanti b'soich. Each one of our houses are miniature botei mikdash. And there's in of shmiras Beis HaMikdash also in our own homes. In what sagt sich Hatzaros? How does it express itself? When you take a look at the mitzvah of Shmiras HaMikdash, you see basically that there's two types of Shmir. Even though the Rambam talks about Shmira shel Kavod, but when you learn Chumash and you see the Leviim, their Shmira wasn't the Shmira shel Kavod just. It was a Shmira to make sure that people that are Tomei, people that are impure, shouldn't go enter into the Mikdash. They make sure that foreign things that are not shaykhs to the Beis HaMikdash shouldn't enter the Mikdash. So you see that there's a shmira of Kavod, and there's a shmira regarding the Beis HaMikdash also when it comes to Tum and Tyre, and also that there's areas where a Yisrael is not allowed to enter to make sure that everyone stays in the right place. We talk about shmira shel Kavod. There's a sikh from the Rebbe. The Rebbe talks about in Parshas Emer. It says Emer v'amarta l'kahanim. And it's obvious that it's a redundant statement. Emer v'amarta. What does Rashi say? L'hazer gedolim l'aktam. That the kahanim that already reached the age, they have to watch that the children, young kahanim, should also not be metamim. Even small kahanim, younger children. L'hazer gedolim l'aktam. So the Rebbe writes in the Sikh, and the Rebbe says, L'hazer gedolim l'aktanim, that older people have to watch over the younger people that they shouldn't be doing wrong, is a general klal that we learn from that in all mitzvahs loises. Lahazer G'dolim Alaktanim. We learn it from Tum and Cheder. We learn it from Shkotzim. We learn it from Dam. L'choyre, the Rebbe says the Lahazer G'dolim Alaktanim is such a basic thing. The L'choyre, why wasn't it given by Aseres HaDibros? Right away, Lahazer G'dolim Alaktanim. That the older generation is to wash over the younger generation, the kids. And one of the things that the Rebbe says in the Sikha, he says, to watch over our younger generation that they shouldn't be doing things wrong, that already we know from Avraham Avinu. L'man Yitzav es Bonov. That was his big mile. Nishlet, since we had Nayoim Yoim. His big mile that he was mechaber his family. He was mechaber his younger generation. He made sure that they kept what they had to keep. So that we know already from Avraham Avinu. The Rebbe says that the Lahazer G'dolim Alaktanim, we're talking about, he wants to offer an explanation that we're talking about a different level in Chinuch. Lahazer is not only to warn the younger generation, but Lahazer is also from the Lashon Zoyer V'or, to enlighten. What we're looking for is to enrich and to enlighten the younger generation, to give them enthusiasm, simcha, slavus, chayas, to give them energy in their Torah mitzvahs. Not just to teach them what's right and what's wrong, not just to tell them what's right and what's wrong, but to infuse with them an enrichment and an enlightenment and an enthusiasm. Miloshin Zoyer V'or, that's part of our chayes as parents and as mechanchim. Give them that enthusiasm. To give an example, we should be able to understand what we're talking about. As a child, in my house, as I grew up, my Baba lived in the house. My Zayda passed away at a very young age. And my Baba, she moved in a lot into our house because my mother was the youngest daughter, and she had younger children, so she came to live in our house to be able to help out. So for many years, I lived with a Baba in the house. Aziz came from the Altaheim. She was from Tushim, Poilen, nicht weit von Lodz, Steppe, Tushim. And she's mamish. She came over into the United States in the early 30s, I think in 1932, 33. And she came out and she can't read a word English. When she passed away in 1972. This is a garden. And our Rov, Shoichet Moil, basically a jack of all trades. In Kleine Stettlach, he was Mefarnes, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Augusta, Georgia, Carbondale, Pennsylvania. My mother was from Chattanooga, and Zedek ben Alexander Chos. Der Baba ben Ager, die sind verschiedene Kinder. Alexander hebben gesagt, Zedek, wenn Gasten gehabt mit der Baba, ist die geworden eine Ede mit der Alexander, mit der Ager, is forking Ger Lenin in Koil there. So, she was mamish from the Altaheim. And I remember growing up in the house, see her in action. You know, Emes from the Altaheim, Cheder, you had to talk Shira Malison, 15 Shira, the Tillums, the Tchinas, everything, you know, the works, but how they describe. And I remember she left in her in Savoy for her 5 daughters. She didn't have any sons, 5 daughters at Savoy. And that Savoy, it's like a lost. She wrote in the will that the daughters should be mishtadel. One of the things that she wrote in the will, that they should make an effort that they should light Shabbos candles always 10 minutes before the Zman and mit Shabbos Cheder. Nicht hab's angetan, mit Shabbos dicke Cheder stehen neben der Licht und sind 7 Minuten vor der Zeit. In a family, when you have little kids, it's not so simple. Gaat dahin en her, de laatste minuut. And I remember as a child, I would sit on the couch in the living room and watch. The living room and the dining room were connected. And she would light Shabbos candles 10 minutes before the Zman. And she would stand in her Shabbos Cheder. And she would daven, leben the licht. And she davened, and she davened. And I used to watch her from the couch. And I always say to myself, when it comes to Nila, yet you're a Nila, I'm after Dor Kodesh. I say, Halavai, I should be able to daven with the same Ernstkeit, how my Baba davened by the Licht every Erev Shabbos. She honored and respected what it means to light Shabbos candles. Sie given a shmirish kavod. She wasn't just a shomer mitzvah. The shmiri given a shmiri mit kavod. She respected the mitzvah. She honored the mitzvah. It's a completely different mitzvah when it's done in such a way. Or as I was sitting, I was sitting shiva for my father, all of his shoulder, and a guy walks in, and I said to him, when did you know my father? From which part of his life? I didn't know everybody. He says to me, we taught together in the Beis Yehuda Day School in Detroit. First 7 years after my father got married, we lived in Detroit. Taught together in Malamed and Mechanech. All his years. So first we were in Detroit 7 years, in Beis Yehuda. Mein Zede, mein Vetter, ich had a Vetter Shlomo Hochler. Ik ben echt een mechanich in Beis Yehuda. Ik ben also in Yitzchak, Atfotske, from Atfot. So he told me he used to organize every year a trip to Telz in Cleveland. He used to bring the Beis Yehuda Talmidim for a Shabbos in Telz. So he said to me, the Rosh Hashiva, I don't know if it was Rav Sorotsky or Rav Stein, I don't know which one. He said to me, I think it was Rav Sorotsky, he said to me, als hij het hem gezegd. Eén Beis Yehuda Talmud is worth 5 New Yorkers. That was the kind of chinuch that was in that place. One Beis Yehuda Talmud was worth 5 New Yorkers. He wanted the Beis Yehuda Talmud. It was a emes chinuch. Simcha Wasserman was the Nal, the Friedman, Elias. So give it emes mechanchim. My uncle Rav Shneur Weinberg. Hochner, my father, see, these guys were into chinuch. It was their lives. It wasn't just a livelihood. It was their lives. Melechas Hashem, kipshutim. So this guy said he met up with my father in Beis Yehuda. And he tells me, he says to me, I'll tell you an interesting story. He says, your father went to New York. He says, there wasn't a Lubavitcher guy. This guy walks in. He says, I think your father went to New York for Yud Shvat. And he asked me that I should substitute for his class. He says to me, as far as I remember, it was grade 3. So I was substituting. And they were learning Parshas Vayetze. So I was saying to the kids, I said, you say the Pasuk, and you say the Pasuk, and then I would translate and teach them the Pasuk. He says, I came to the last Pasuk in Parshas Vayetze. And I asked one of the kids to say the Pasuk. And the whole class pipes up. Says, what? That's not how you say a pussy. Last pussy? A parsha? Stop. So I looked at him and I said to him, what do you mean? He said, our Malamed taught us. It's a siyum of a parsha. It's a schus to Messiah a parsha. It's a big schus to say a siyum in a parsha. We auction it off. Whoever gives the most money, he brings it in the next day. We go to the store, we buy kibbut, machas mitzvah. And the guy gets up and he says the pasuk in front of the whole kita, and then we finish the parsha and we have a Shuls mitzvah. It's a siyum parsha. Grade 3 auction. Yeah. He insisted. So he says he started to make the auction. He says, I'll never forget. It was 2 guys slugging it out for the schus. And he says to me, it went to $1.77. He says, I remember it till today. It was a lot of money in 1953. Oh, wow. He says, and the guy tells me, and you want to know something interesting? He says to me, 2 guys that were slugging it out, 2 kids, they're both top Askonim today in Detroit. He says, and they're still slugging it out today. They're still what he called. He says, but they're... He tells me the next day the kid came into the class, brought in the money. He went to the bakery, went to the supermarket, went to the store, he bought everything. Brought it into the kita, whatever money's left over, it goes to his docket, opened up the tables, put in the things. He got up in front of the class, he said the person, getting the parsha, he says, after seeing Shuls mitzvah, he says to me, your father was in New York. He wasn't even there. But he had succeeded in instilling in the kids a geschmack to finish a parsha and to make a Shuls mitzvah and the whole, 9 yards. I call it the koilus ubroken of Matan Torah. He says, that was me. That enthusiasm to dressing up, giving honor and prestige to a mitzvah, giving it its correct, putting it on the pedestal, putting it up there. Shmira of the Beis Hamikdash is not just a shmira from a zikim. It's a shmira, a royal guard, giving a royalty to the mitzvah. Thus, that's what the Rebbe says, lahazer gedolim alaktanim. To give enlightenment, enrichment, enthusiasm, zest, joy, all the words you want to say. That's the nikuda. And v'tein l'chochem v'yech kamoid. I mean, when I heard the mice, I said to myself, why couldn't I have heard this mice earlier? You know how many siyum parshas my kids had that I didn't make a fuss about it in the house? You know how many siyum prokim in Mishnayos or siyum prokim in Gemara? I mean, I even found the mice afterwards with Rav Hutner. Pachad Yitzchok. He tells over his story also. He says when he was 8 years old, he came back home from one day from Cheder, and he walked into the house and he told his mother. He finished Perek HaMafkid in school. And he walked into his bedroom. He says a half hour later he walked out of the bedroom and he sees a white tablecloth on the table with Shabbos candles. And he smelled a cake in the oven. He walks into the kitchen and he sees his mother with Shabbos clothes. And he says to her, who's the guest that's coming here making such a fuss? She says, there's no guest. He says, what's going on? He was 8 years old. She says, the tata cooked him. We're making a masibah. We're making a party. He says, what? My son finished Perek HaMafkid. Baruch Hashem, I was zoichet that my son finished Perek HaMafkid. We're making a big deal. And Rav Hutner told his Talmidim, he said, that's when I understood what it means chavivus of limud Torah. How endearing it is to learn Torah. All the drushes that I heard from my teachers didn't count What counted was the white tablecloth with the Shabbos candles, with the cake, with the Shabbos clothes of my mother. Oh, the koilus who brought him about the Torah. That's what makes the difference. Those are the shmira from COVID when it comes to the basic. Then, of course, there's another shmira that has to be in the basic. That's keeping away the Yonah of Tumah from the basic. When we have our homes, we have to protect our homes. The technology of today is gefährlich am meisten. If we don't protect our homes, you know, there's an interesting letter from the Rebbe. There was a lady in the 70s that she asked, she was in Florida, Miami, and she was involved in Jewish education. And she was involved in the Jewish high school there. And she writes into the Rebbe and she says she wants to maybe put into the one of the things in the high school to learn a little bit of self-protection. Karate. That they should learn karate. It should be part of the physical education karate lessons. So she asks the Rebbe, what does the Rebbe have to say about it? The Rebbe gives an answer, an unbelievable answer. The Rebbe says like this. He says that in the times of Europe, when we're in the ghetto, we lived in ghettos. He says the walls of the ghetto protected us for our Jewish identification. We knew we're Jewish. We have a different lifestyle. The goyim are outside of the walls of the ghetto. They have a different lifestyle. So we knew clearly who we are. We weren't able to go to universities to get the same professions. We couldn't live in certain cities. In the cities we were limited where we have to live. So it was clear who we are. The walls and the restrictions protected us for our Jewish identification. Our Jewish identity. Aubrey says, the minute the ghetto walls fell, we understand that when it came to the War of Napoleon, the Alter Rebbe, he sided with Russia because of that. He was afraid of the freedom and the liberty that Napoleon was going to bring. What kind of a damage, the ruchnistic damage it's going to give to Klal Yisrael. So it's better to be oppressed physically than to have that sakon. The Rebbe says after the ghetto walls fell, and all of a sudden Jews can live wherever they want, and they can go to universities and they can take professions wherever they want. They're not limited, and they can live wherever they want. It became a new challenge: how to protect the Jewish identity of the Jewish people. He says, when you expose the younger generation to foreign cultures, you don't know how far they're going to take it. The karate, which is coming from the Far East, and the whole business, you don't know where they're going to take it once you start exposing them and you make it official in the school, where they can take it further. So immediately says, was wenige exposure, it was better. In the 70s, when I saw this letter, I said to myself, what can we say today? It's not only that the ghetto walls have fallen. There's no more walls b'chlal. There's no more walls of shuls. There's no more walls of yeshivas. There's no more walls of seminaries. There's no more walls of schools. The modern technology has made it that all the walls are transparent. Everything gets in. To be able to protect the Jewish identity today is a lot more of a challenge. It's a completely different ballgame today. That's what's going on. Somebody asked me, what's the minute where you like Hanukkah candles? By the window or by the door opposite of the mezuzah? I tell them there's two different predominant minhagim. There's a third minute today. I said, what? I said, if you have a computer in your house with internet without any filter, you can put the menorah there. Pesach basically b'chutz. If you have a smartphone in your house or an iPhone without any filters, put it on the table and you put the menorah next to it. It's Pesach basically b'chutz. It's right there, the whole street is right here on the table. The Shmira from the Mazikim is Zicher. Today, Avada, there's got to be filters with protection. It's destroying the Jewish identity. I just read a letter from the Rebbe yesterday. I have a meeting that I read 5 letters of the Rebbe a day in Hebrew. And I added on, since the Corona area, the COVID-19, 1 letter in English. So my letter in English yesterday, the Rebbe writes, there's a statement that the Rebbe writes in the letter. He says, in the supersonic jet age, he writes this, I think, in the early 80s. In the supersonic jet age, the road from stopping to be makbid on Chol Yisrael till intermarriage has become very short, or has been shortened. In the supersonic jet age, the road from stopping to be makbid on Chol Yisrael to get to intermarriage has been shortened. Everything can be much quicker. That's what Rebbe writes. In the supersonic jet age, what do we say, the internet age? Listen, I'll tell you something. When I read the letter, I said, when they ever wrote it, maybe then they had to believe it. Today you see it. Today you see it. You see with them also, though you geleit, it's not mentioned. It said, Uvgod geworden in Frumeheiser, in Chassidischheiser, in Redischheiser, in Litwischheiser, was, you name it. And they got good chinuch, and all of a sudden, with the ball. They're way out in left field. Some of them out in the ballpark. What's going on? In the supersonic jet age, we have to realize that we're in such a situation. The protection, the shmira for such things has to be much stronger. It doesn't just happen. There's influences that are going on. People are getting absorbed into all this kind of stuff. You open up a radio, the tarnished hair was a red. Now that I hear it, it's not. It's nicht for a Yiddish shtub. The news is a lot of times not for a Yiddish shtub. The things that they talk about, and everyone's listening. We're already numb. We've lost a certain sensitivity. We don't even realize it. Mele in Shmiras Hamikdash, V'osel Hamikdash V'shechanti B'soichem. We're talking about two types of shmira. Shmira shel kavod, the kodesh of Baruch and Matan Torah. And we're talking about the shmira, the surmira and the asay toiv. The daf get machinuch to work on ourselves. How do we keep ourselves enthused? I'm a learned a bissel chassidus. I'm a halt lein learning. You get enthused. Or v'chayis nafshenu nidin. You got to keep yourself going. You got to rejuvenate yourself. You got to reinvigorate. You got to fill up your own batteries. When you're flying a plane sometimes, so they show you, at the beginning of the plane, they show you the security video. And they tell you if you're flying and all of a sudden there's no oxygen, the masks come down. They tell you how to put it on. And they say if you're flying with a child, they say first put your mask on yourself, then put it on your child. I looked at the security video. I said, why? Everything is take care of my child. What do you mean I should put first myself? He doesn't know what's going on. Maybe I understand. He doesn't know what's going on. No. You know why? If you're not going to take care of yourself and put on your own mask with oxygen, design can die in a kid. There won't be a father who will be able to take care of his son. Make sure that your mind is clear. You'll be able to give him the oxygen. You got to keep yourself enthused all the time. You got to keep rejuvenating. Keep learning. You can't stagnate and you can't live on interest of what you learned in the past. There's got to be a constant growth. That's what we have to work on. Mele when the Friedrich the Rebbe writes that you have to have a serious nefesh for chinuch atzmi, for our own chinuch. We have to have that serious nefesh also for our families. It all goes into it. The Eibishter gave us our children as pikdoides, and we have to take care of them. And this all goes into it. And that's the mitzvah. When the zestig, the Messias Nefesh, and the Friedrich Rebbe, when he came to Chinuch in Russia, then also coming to America, to make sure that Friedrich Rebbe started schools. He sent out Bochum, 18, 19 years old, to open up Talmud Torahs, Rochester. Rabbi Schusterman's father. My mother lived for a year in Rochester. It was his principal. Rochester, Worcester, Springfield, Buffalo. All these places. 18, 19-year-old Bochum to go out to open up in the 40s. It was Meshuggah. Right away when we came to America, he saw, what's with all the Jewish people living out in New York? What's going to be with them? Aber es hat doch der Peter besagt. And that's where we get involved. He's depending on us to be the soldiers to get the job done. In our own families and also in the communities. So we sagen, L'chaim, He shall help. He Matzliach. In the Tzochem from Yud Beis Tammuz, the Tzochem also for in our own personal chinuch, also the chinuch of the mishpachas, the chinuch of the kehillas, and the chinuch of ganz Klal Yisrael. Chaim, Chaim. I'll finish off with a Monsey. A Monsey and also with a Nekuda. And the Monsey is like this. I'll tell you what the catalyst, and then the story. The catalyst was Rabbi Farbrengen, Yud Beis Tammuz. I don't know if it was Lamed Beis or Lamed Gimmel, one of those years. And many times, by the Farbrengens of Yud Beis Tammuz, as they're close to the summer, Rabbi would talk about the importance of education, Chinuch. And he would talk about the importance of making sure that the children have what to fill their time up in the summer. And he would talk about the camps, sending kids to camps and making sure the kids go to camps. He would talk about that they should have Jewish content. And he would say that during the year they have to learn the Limude Choil also, but in the summer there's only Limude Choil, so you can have a full day of Kodesh, a full day of enriched a living experience in camp. It was very strong in turn that Chinuch, the Messias Nefesh of the Friedrich Rebbe, when he came to Chinuch, he touched the noise many times in Beis Tammuz, the Farbrengens, or right the Shabbos before or after, making sure that Jewish children have a summer experience, a Jewish summer experience. If it's camps, whatever you can do for them. And he talked about it always very strong as one of the lessons from Yud Beis Tammuz. Because you know, one of the things about the Rebbe was always that the Rebbe brings things down to earth for our day. So the Messias Nefesh, the Friedrich Rebbe for Chinuch in Russia, spoke about that we should also be dedicating the Lord to his house. At that year, when the Rebbe spoke about it, there was two things that my father, the Shuls, took very much to heart after he heard the Farbrengen. He was in Toronto, he heard the sheep, he heard the hookup, and he was teaching. So the next day, when he went into his class, he asked each one of the kids, he taught in Chaim day schools in Toronto, he asked each one of his kids in the class, what's their plans for the summer? And each one said what they're planning on doing for the summer. One of the kids, he was a family that came from North Africa. In those days, in Toronto, after the 6-Day War, the 60s and the 70s, there was a lot of Jews that came from North Africa. They left Morocco, Tunisia, and Algiers. One of the countries that opened up the doors was Canada. So there was a nice influx of Yidden from North Africa in Toronto. And a lot of them integrated into the Chaim Day School. And my father taught a lot of them. And where we lived, in the area that we lived, it was not far from government projects that the government gave them cheap housing when they first started off. So they used to hang around a lot in the house also by us, play together and everything. So he turned to one of the boys from North African descent, and he asked him, "What are you doing for the summer?" And the boy said, "I'm going to the camp in Portland. It's a camp from the city of Toronto, a day camp from public school." He says, "Then Camp Northland." Why Camp Northland? He says, because the government is giving it for free to my parents because of the social economic situation that we're in. My parents can't afford to pay for camps. So we're going to the camp. I'm going to Camp Northland. So my father hears that. Says, "Camp." So my father says to him, "You know what? When there came recess, my father called him over. He asked him, do you think if I would be able to get you into a Camp Aguda? Out of Toronto, there was Camp Aguda those days. It's like a six week overnight. He says, if you think I could get you in there, your parents would object or they would go along with it." He was probably grade 6, grade 7, something like that. So he said, no, he says, I don't think my parents would object. He says, the main thing is that they're objecting because, they can just throw the money. So my father went home, and he called up the director of the Kappa Good. You know him? And he said to him, listen, I have a boy in my class, and it's Chaim. He told him the whole story. He says to me, the parents don't have a penny to their name. What can you do to help me and get him to camp? So he says, I'll give him a 50% scholarship. I'll go with you 50-50. You bring 50%, I give you up to 50%. Okay. So he went to Shul Mincha Ma'ariv. And he turned to the whole oil in Shul. He says, I have a kid. He's going to end up going to a Koy Yeshiva. Daycare. Rachman al-Islam, you know what it's going to be? And he says, I got a 50% scholarship. I need kach money. So the oil put together the money. This was $200, this was $300, this was $100. And they put together the rest of the money. Next day, he called up the family. The family's name was Bill Dab. He called up the family. And he spoke to the parents. He spoke to the father. He might have even got over to the house. He said, he has a full scholarship to be able to go to Camp Good. And they agreed. And the boy went, he was the oldest son. And he went to Camp Good. He was there for 6 weeks, 6-7 week camp. He came back all enthused from the camp experience. Came home to his parents. And he started to make them a shuggy. The kashrus is not up to par. Shabbos we got to go to shul. It was like, more traditional family. And why shouldn't my brothers and sisters also go to Eitz Chaim? And he started making the family meshuvah. And he was successful. And the whole family turned over. When I was in Shaitadach by the Shloshim, when I was in Toronto, made a Shloshim in Eitz Chaim Day School, I stood at the Bima to speak. The Bima was donated by the Beldab family in Eitz Chaim Day School. That family donated the Bima and made a nice big shul for the Eitz Chaim and Patricia over there. Anyways, years go by, and I had a chasna. I was a Masada Kedushin in Nes Ziona. That's a town next to Rehovot, right next to Rehovot. And so I come to the wedding, and I sit down with the family, and I say to them, you want to be Mechabed anyone by the Shever Brachos, by the Chuppah? And they told me, yeah, they have there's a grandfather, there's not. And they tell me, there's a Koil Yugaman that from Beit Shemesh, he's a relative from Toronto, it's a Koil Yugaman. If he comes, we want to give Bracha Chita. He's a very choshev Koil. So I say to him, yeah, Toronto, when he said Toronto, my antennas went up. Toronto. So he says to me, so I say to him, what's his name? He says, my name is Bildab. Yankee Bildab, Yitzchak Bildab, I don't remember the first name of him. And he says, if he comes, we want to give him the Bracha. Okay. Comes to the chuppah, I'm standing under the chuppah, and I turn to the father, the chassan, and I say to him, is your cousin here in the oil? He says to me, yeah, he's here. No, so I call him up, Bracha Chita, Bildab, Yankee Bildab, comes up, the whole lavush, everything. Gets up, he makes the Bracha Chita, and then the Mazel Tov in air. I walk over to him to the side. He tell me, did you go to Eitz Chaim when you were in Toronto? He says to me, yeah. As a matter of fact, I said to him, my name is Gluckowsky. Did you know Rabbi Gluckowsky in Toronto? And he says to me, yeah, sure. He says, as a matter of fact, he was the one that got my older brother to get us all involved. He had the influence on the family. He tells me over to Monsey. He says to me, here I'm sitting in, I'm in Nes Zion. Choshev Koil Yudaman. He gets the Broch Achridim. It's coming from a Sikhe that the Rebbe spoke about Yud Beis Tammuz. That the importance of making sure that Jewish children have a summer experience full of Yiddish Teuchen. So because of that, my father went and he worried the guy should get a camper good with the scholarship, with the whole business. And I'm by sitting and I'm watching the Paris right here. I was like, in cloud nine to see it, just to realize. Goes by another year. My Farbrengen Yud Beis Tammuz, Shabbos was Shabbos Yud Beis Tammuz or Shabbos before Yud Beis Tammuz. And one of the shluchim in Rehovot tells me he wants me to come for Shuls to Farbrengen. So I came to his Chabad house, one of the neighborhoods. I met Mendel. I come to his house. I come to the shul, sit down in the Chabad house, and have a Shuls. I tell him I saw over how the Rebbe spoke about in the summer, making sure you have summer experiences. And I say to him, and that summer, my father came up with a new idea project, Shibud Alev HaMoich. He called it the drop-in center. Anyone, Jewish kids, teenagers, come into the Lubavitcher shul. It's a drop-in center. You come in the morning, you daven Shachris. There's a beautiful breakfast, with things that kids like. Not the adult breakfast. Kids like. And also afterwards a shear, and then you go to the park nearby, the park on Palm Drive, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. Park there, and baseball or soccer or whatever. And like a whole morning every day, and he brought my brother back to be in the drop-in center to sit and learn with the guys that come in. When Shemar came back with another two guys, I think they were there. And there was guys, there was Balei Tshuva, Kipshuta. Aaron Oswald is a fellow from the drop-in center. And there's a couple of guys, the Mamish became Fruma guys from this drop-in center. But tens of kids came and they took part in the drop-in center. And I tell it over to the guys, I say, this is, we as Chassidim, we take our guidance from the Rebbe, take our direction from the Rebbe, but we got to get the job done. We can't just depend on what the Rebbe's going to take care of it. He gives us the guidance and direction, but we're the ones that have to do it. That's what's going to make it's the general that gives strategy, but it's the foot soldiers that make the victory. They're on the front lines. As I'm finishing, as I tell the story to the drop-in center, one of the guys sitting there, I'm one of the guys from the drop-in center. I said, what? He tells me, yeah, his name was David Biton. He tells me I was living in Canada, in Toronto at the time. I was living in a completely different, not a Jewish neighborhood. My first cousin lived in the neighborhood where the Lubavitcher shul is. He called me up and he said, there's something going on in Chabad. You don't have anything to do with your time anyways this summer. It's good, you can have fun. It's like good breakfast, sports and everything in it. He says, I came from a traditional background. He says, I'm a Sorati, I wasn't from. He says, I came. And they schlepped me in. He says, we became a Sherba Shabbos from the drop-in center. And he's sitting by me, right? He's Farbrengen, by the Chabad house in Rehovot. It's a long Cheder b'chayecha when I was able to see such things. You see what's going on. But you realize that we're the ones that have to make the difference. And we can make a difference. And we can change people's lives. And we can make the revolution, like they said. And that we have to realize. And Yud Beis Tammuz, Tovshin Pei Aleph, is you're living in a community. What's going on with everyone in the community when it comes to the summer? Is everyone taken care of? Or are there kids that are Valgan and Chedegasim, just walking around the streets? I don't have to tell you what Chazal say. Batola maybe they Shimon, Batola maybe they worse things than that. We're the ones that have to make the difference. And that's the name of the game, friends. Our head gives us the clarity and the direction, but it's the feet that bring the head where he wants to get to. And that's where we all have to get involved. And we have to have achrayus and feel what's going on with our talmidim, what's going on with our communities, what's going on in the neighbors that we live, what's going on with our neighbors. and you can never tell where it's going to take them and how far it's going to go. A ganze mishpacha, a koiling man, chosh v'koiling man, sitting in the Shemesh, that he's directly from that. A Yid that tells me he's a Shem Shabbos today from the drop-in center. It's all from the guidance, but also the commitment that we all have to be able to get the job done. Maybe should hopefully we should be zoiche. Yud Beis Tammuz this year already. We should see the Tzemach, we should see the Gula. And it should be a Hafcha Yomei L'Sos and L'Simcha. And we should be zoiche already. It should be Memheir.
Amen.
A brocha chroim.